Out now. So hello, wonderful people of the internet. Welcome back to another episode of Leos Labs. Today, we're going to answer what might be the most common question I have gotten asked throughout my years of streaming and making content on YouTube, Twitch, and all these other platforms. And that is, should you get a PhD? There's a bunch of answers to this question. Some are simple, some are not. And this might be a long discussion. I'm hoping that with this discussion, as we start talking, we can kind of bounce ideas off of chat and maybe answer some specific questions that people have about their specific problems. I guess as a bit of background, I'm Dr. James Schloss. I got my PhD in 2019 from the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology in Okinawa, Japan. I then spent a year working at MIT doing climate science. I then spent a year after that working with 3 Blue and Brown doing content online. I then spent the next couple years as a contractor working for MIT while working remotely in Barcelona. So in terms of people who would be biased towards you getting a PhD, yeah, that's me. I am particularly biased towards the academic system, and I wear those biases on my sleeve just to let you guys know. Yes, if you're asking me, should you do a PhD, I'm generally going to be favorable. I'm going to say, it's probably a good idea for you to do the PhD for several reasons, but there are some things you need to know before entering the system. I am actually live. Yeah, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, ideas, feel free to let me know, and I'll totally address them as soon as I see them in chat. I don't think there's too many people here right now, which is totally fair. It sometimes takes a little while for people to pop in, but I think we'll go ahead and start talking about what I feel is the most important thing when you start discussing or thinking internally about whether you should or shouldn't do a PhD. So let me go ahead and go to ZerlVP and write down or start talking about the list of things that I've written down that I kind of want to talk about beforehand. So number one, when you're doing a PhD, right? When you're thinking about the PhD, I think a lot of people have a misconception as to what the PhD actually is. They seem to think it's like an extra 4 to 5 years of school on top of undergraduate, which is to some extent correct. It is a couple extra years of schooling on top of undergraduate. But when you think about doing this particular, type of school, it's quite different than what you've done up until undergraduate level, right? So in, let's say, elementary school, junior high, high school, undergraduate, in all of these places, you're spending the majority of your time sitting in class, listening to a lecturer, reading a book, trying to learn about a particular topic. That is generally not what the PhD is like. The PhD, on the other hand, is more like, you could say, a 5-year-long internship where you're trying to figure out whether you actually want to do research as a career long-term, right? And so rather than sitting in a class and listening to lecturers, which you certainly will do in the first couple of years, it becomes more or less an exercise of you grappling with the scientific literature on your own, trying to figure out how to push that boundary of human knowledge and doing things that people haven't done before, right? And so the number one thing that you need to know, or rather you need to figure out for yourself as to whether a PhD would be good for you or not, is to determine whether you actually even like doing research. So that's question number one. Do you like the process of doing research? Do you like reading papers? I can tell you right now, if you're one of those people who just gets a little bit clickbaited by archive titles, like you find yourself reading a paper and thinking to yourself, man, that was cool, I want to read another paper, you're probably going to love the PhD. If, on the other hand, you don't like reading papers and you don't like whatever process you've done with research so far, I don't know, you might not like doing a PhD. So that's question number one, how to tell whether you like research. And we'll kind of talk about that in a bit. So number two, whether the PhD will open more doors than it closes. Like what does a PhD actually give you in terms of career development, right? Is it good to do a PhD? Should you stick with your undergraduate? Should you maybe go somewhere in the middle and do a master's? These are all the questions that we can answer and talk about. Not finally, there's a whole bunch of other questions that we want to talk about here. One is how academics tend to be more or less biased towards academia. That is to say, if you are an academic, if you've been going through an undergraduate physics curriculum or something like that, probably everyone around you wants to do a PhD, right? And so you need to kind of sift through those biases to determine whether this is something you truly want or if it's something you're kind of going with the crowd to figure out. Finally, I keep saying finally, but there's a whole bunch of different things here. We want to talk about research without a PhD, whether it is possible to do research without getting the degree. I want to talk about OIST, some stories about the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, specifically because this institution, it shows the story of the institution I went to for my PhD helps explain a lot of pitfalls within the academic system as it currently exists. And I think it's a really good thing to talk about, just in terms of like what academia is like in the US, what it is outside of the US, some general issues with the academic system at large, all that kind of stuff. We need to talk about money, whether you can financially support yourself doing a PhD or not. We want to talk about the question, are you good enough to do a PhD? Short answer, probably. I think you don't have to be particularly smart to get a PhD. You just have to be diligent. And as long as you're diligent, you can usually make it. And finally, the last question, can you actually be a professor? What does it look like to be at the final levels? You've got your PhD, you've done the postdocs, you've been through the academic rat race, you're at the end of the game. How likely is it that you will actually be a professor? And why would you even want to be a professor in the first place? So these are all the questions that I want to talk about today. Again, these are based on discussions that I've had with plenty of members of the community, both here on Twitch and YouTube, but also just on Discord. And I've got this question a lot in my YouTube comments. I don't know, like in real life, people have asked me these questions a lot. This is probably the most common question, right? I've ever been asked as a science communicator or a scientist. Should I finish or start going towards getting a PhD or not? By the way, Hanaf, Jai Derek, thank you guys so much for coming in. Hope you guys are all having a wonderful day. So let's start with question number one, right? One, do you like research, right? How can you tell whether this is something you want to spend your time doing? Is this something that you enjoy, right? Here's the number one way. This is what I always tell people. To tell whether you enjoy doing research or not, go over here and go to the archive.org, all right? And just go. Find something you think you're interested in. Let's say you think you're interested in physics, all right? Specifically, let's say you're interested, I don't know, plasma physics, okay? Click plasma physics, go to plasma physics, and just read these titles. Do these sound interesting to you? You know what I mean? Back to the figure 8 stellarator. I don't know what that means. What is a figure 8 stellarator? I'm actually kind of interested. Let's click that PDF. Like, I'm legitimately interested. This is my problem. Anytime I see a research paper, I'm always just clickbaited by the title. I cannot explain why. It feels like whenever I see something like this, I'm like, wow, this is super cool. Stability of cross-field amplifiers. What is a cross-field amplifier? Man, see, this is the problem, right? But the point is, the number one way to tell whether you're interested in research or not is just pulling out a research paper and reading it and saying, is this fun? Do you enjoy this process? And if you enjoy that process, I mean, that's your answer. You like doing research. And if you like doing research, sorry about that, I hit the microphone. If you like doing research, doing a PhD is the easiest way to get your foot in the door to continue doing research as a career. There are other options, but again, if you enjoy the process of reading papers, this is probably something that you'll enjoy doing. The PhD is something that you will probably like, right? And so, again, I always recommend go to the archive, archive.org, and just figure out what it is that you like. If you didn't like that paper, maybe you prefer more math papers, so you go to Math New, or maybe Computer Science New. Maybe you're interested in economics. This is all the kind of stuff that you'll figure out. Just find a paper that you like, read the paper, and see if this is an enjoyable process, right? Let me go ahead and catch up on chat. Do you have any comments or remarks regarding starting a PhD mid-career and not just after an undergrad? Yeah, so I think we can talk about that a little bit later, but we can also talk about it now. So it really depends on what your goal is, right? I was intending to talk about this when we talked about question 4, research without a PhD. Because again, the whole point of getting a PhD is to get your foot in the door so you can do research as a career. That's the goal, right? That's what you want to do. And so if you're finding that you are not enjoying your time as a software engineer or any type of field, whatever it happens to be that you're doing, if you're not enjoying your time doing that and you want to be doing more research-like things, then going for a PhD in the middle of a career makes sense, right? Keep in mind, this isn't something you can do lightly. Like it's going to take a lot of time and effort to figure out, and you might have to put your job on hold for a bit while you're doing that PhD. Now, will this open up more doors than it closes? The answer is it will probably close more doors than it opens, right? What I mean is, once you get a PhD, you're more or less overqualified to do a lot of positions that you would have otherwise been perfectly qualified for, right? This is just what people think, because if you have a PhD, generally people who are hiring think they need to pay you more, and there just isn't enough budget to hire a PhD when you could hire a master's or just an undergrad to do the same job, right? But with that said, the PhD does open doors that were not open before, and these doors are all research doors. And though there are fewer doors available, those doors are usually harder to get to. Therefore, it ends up, I think, being that you have the same number of jobs available. It's just the jobs are different. They're not necessarily high paying. It's just that they're going to be research jobs instead of engineering jobs. Is undergrad the same as having a bachelor's? I don't fully know the English U.S. terminology. Yeah, so it's a little bit different in Europe. So I've been sticking with the U.S. system. But in the U.S. system, oh gosh, okay, so let me see if I can remember the European system. So the European system does, I think it's 3 years for bachelor's. And then it does 2 years for master's, and then I think it's 3 years for PhD, if I remember correctly. Guys, correct me. This is Europe, and then the U.S. system is going to be 4 years undergrad, which is where you get your bachelor's degree. Then 2 years master. And then usually 5-year PhD, but it depends. The truth is that for the US, the 5-year PhD is bundling the master's with the PhD part of the program. So it does depend a little bit. Usually if you're going for a PhD, you don't go for a separate master's. So this is the biggest difference between Europe and the US. In Europe, the master's program is somewhat different than the bachelor's and PhD. And usually when you go for the PhD, you already have an idea in mind of what you want to do. For the US, usually the PhD masters are bundled together, where you get a research master's in the middle of the PhD while you're going for it. Still ready to basically use version of tokamak. Yeah, I should have remembered that. I don't like doing research, but when I'm at the maker space at school, I'm forced to do research to find out whether my ideas will work or not. Yeah, talk more about that. I don't know what you mean. Depends a bit on the course. PhD often takes around 5 years. Depends on the degree, but 3 to 3.5 years for bachelor's is usual. 2 for master's, 4 for PhD. 4 for PhD then. I'll add a 4 there. Isn't bachelor 4 years? In the US, it's 4 years. Default 4 years, sometimes 5, depending on the coursework. But in Europe, it's different. Bachelor's is already hard enough for me. It depends on the individual person, right? So let's keep going on with the question, do you like doing research, right? So this is the number one question. If you like doing research, go for a PhD. If you don't like doing research, probably don't go for a PhD, right? So how do you tell if you like doing research? A, look at the archive, archive.org. That's it. If you like reading papers, you're going to like doing research, probably, right? Another way to tell whether you like doing research, do Europs, or undergraduate research opportunities. So what these are ways for you to talk to a professor and to determine whether you actually like doing research to begin with or not. They have some sort of project, and that project is somehow related to research that they're doing in their lab. It's usually not like a big thing that's going to like change the boundary of human knowledge like fundamentally. It's something that you as an undergraduate can actually start to tackle and start to work on with your current level of understanding. Remember, there's a lot more to research, and it takes a lot of time to go from an undergraduate level to the level where you're literally at that boundary of human knowledge. But Europs are ways for you to kind of get your feet wet and see whether this is something that you're actually interested or not. So during my undergraduate, I actually worked with, I think, 4 different research groups. So I worked with a psychology research group when I was a sophomore. Then I worked with a plasma research group, an astrophysics research group, and then a separate group that was kind of just for computational work. And then after I finished doing those 4 different research experiences, some of which were paid, actually only one of which was paid, I then also worked at the Los Alamos National Labs, where I did just kind of like, at the time it was more like visualizations of hydrofluid simulations and stuff like that. But this is kind of what you need to do to determine not only do you like research, but what type of research you want to do, right? So go to the archive, read papers, find what you find interesting, and then just jump into a bunch of different research fields. Talk to professors, say, yo, hey, I'm interested. Could you maybe let me do some research in your lab? You might have to do it unpaid. I had to do it unpaid. But generally, as long as you're willing to try, it ends up working out that you'll find your way, right? The main thing is, if you do have in mind the desire, or you want to see whether you're interested in research or not, the number one way to actually tell whether you're interested in doing research is to just try doing research, right? It's kind of like, I've got some friends who wanted to be game developers, right? Yet they spent all their time playing games instead of actually making games, right? And I always told them, like, the number one way to tell whether you actually want to be a game developer is to actually try your hand at making a video game, right? It's the same thing here. Just try your hand at doing the thing you want to do. If it's enjoyable, you're going to like doing it. And if you want to keep doing that, the PhD is a great way to keep doing that. Thank you for your answer. I've been considering starting a PhD a few years and have been looking at openings. As far as I know, that would open more doors in my field here in Tokyo than what I currently do. A lot of my work is research adjacent, but cannibalized by the daily grind. Yeah, I totally understand that. It's kind of like my job right now is a research software engineer, and it really does feel like research adjacent, and I want to do more actual research. You know what I mean? Let me catch down. Might need masters, but I got to find scholarships. We'll talk about money in just a second. I like solving harder and more challenging problems. Is that enough? There is a distinction between solving challenging problems and doing research, right? These are two distinct things. But in general, if you like solving complicated problems, research is probably for you because it is filled with presumably some of the most difficult problems that we as humans have come up with in our time here on Earth. You know what I mean? So presumably the most difficult problems are those that are pushing the boundary of what we can currently do as a species. That's not always true. Sometimes you get a very incredibly complicated problem and it's just in the middle of a software engineering task, or maybe some other job. You know what I mean? Like maybe it's writing a particular poem. I don't know. Like you can find these difficult problems anywhere. But specifically, if you want to push that boundary of human knowledge, that's when you start doing research. And the question is, where is that boundary? How do you get there? What problems, whether those problems are the types of problems that you're actually interested in solving, all of that kind of stuff. And again, the number one way to do that is just to find a guide, read some papers, talk to professors, figure out whether this is something you want to do, all that kind of stuff. So this is it. Like whenever people say, should I do a PhD? The number one question I always come back with is, do you like doing research? If yes, the answer is probably yes, you should do a PhD. If you don't like doing research, then you really need to ask yourself, well, why would you do the PhD to begin with? Is there a legitimate reason to do it beyond the fact that, basically, if you don't like doing research, the PhD is going to feel like probably the worst 5 years of your life, But if you enjoy doing research, it's going to be quite enjoyable. For me, I really, really enjoyed my time doing the PhD. I had literally over 100 hours of my work week scheduled in order to do my PhD in the way that I did it. And so I was working overtime to get my PhD done. Now, I'm not saying everyone needs to do that, right? I'm just saying for me in particular, I was spending way more time doing research, solving problems, learning stuff along the way, trying all this different stuff. Like I spent a lot of time doing my PhD, Not everyone does that. Some people can get away with only 40 hours a week. Some people can get away with even less, But the way that I saw it is I wanted to make the most out of the time that I had during the PhD, because it was 5 years of my life where the only point of those 5 years is to do research. And that to me was a dream, That's not true for everyone else, I like solving hard competitive programming problems. Like those in at-coder, algorithmic, mathematical, and ad hoc coding problems. And I know CP level problems are not in soft. I don't exactly know. So I would argue that these types of problems that you're solving in software engineering are quite different than the type of problems that you need to solve as a researcher. From my experience, what you do as a researcher is basically you just keep reading papers and reading papers and reading papers until you have a wealth of information to draw from. And then it's not so much a problem of, like, yes, you're trying to solve these difficult problems, and that comes up all the time, but it's more of like finding synergy between two kind of disparate ideas, right? So like maybe one paper says this and another paper says this, and people just haven't put the two links together to figure out, oh, these actually work well together. And if you put them together, you can now do something that people haven't been able to do before, right? That's kind of my feeling for research. It's more like looking for places where you can push that people haven't pushed before. And that's what research feels like to me. It's like writing a book type of thing, writing the next chapter of a book, this type of thing. It slowly builds after you start learning everything else, and it's quite distinct, like I said before, than like solving complicated problems and solving complicated software engineering problems. Do the PhD to reach the maximum of your area. That's exactly what it is, right? So let me draw a little diagram for you, right? So here, here's the boundary of human knowledge, all right? It's all wobbly like this, right? So here's where you start with zero knowledge, right? And you could say maybe this is what we know in, let's say, math, right? So plus, minus, division, let's screw it, math, right? And this is what we know in physics, let's say. And this is what we know in, let's say, I don't know, computer science, right? And this is what we know in, I don't know, any of the arts or something like this. Like, let's say, like, English lit, I don't know. It doesn't matter. The point is, you can clearly see that this is kind of like the boundary of, if you add all human knowledge together into one big lump, right? This is that lump of human knowledge, right? And when you as an individual you start here, zero knowledge, right? At the end of high school, you get maybe here. You got a little wobbly ball, right? Where you know some things a little better than others. By the time you finish your undergraduate, you've maybe specialized a little bit in mathematics, but you still haven't quite figured out what your niche is, right? And then by the time you finish the PhD, you've gotten to the point where you've really focused on just one specific area, right? And then everything else here, maybe you have a little bit of knowledge in these areas as well, but for the most part, you have the same base level in some areas as you did at the end of the undergraduate, but you've been able to push that boundary of human knowledge just a little bit right here. And that's your research thesis. That's what you've done that no one else has done before, right? And so when we start talking about doing the PhD and like, expanding what we know as humanity, all this kind of stuff, like getting to the maximum of your area, like Adam Fighter said, this is exactly what you're looking for. You as an individual need to grow. First, you need to grow to high school. Then you need to grow to undergraduate. Let's see, high school, undergraduate, and then PhD on top of that. You have these areas in which you need to grow in. And in growing so, in learning the amount of knowledge that you need, you can then start to add these, like put these ideas together and push in areas that people have not pushed before. There's a comment down here. I like reading stuff, but I hate writing. That's actually a common complaint that I see from a lot of researchers. They say that I really enjoy doing research, but I don't like reading papers or writing papers. And it really depends on who you are. There are some researchers who do not like reading papers, but love the process of doing research, right? These, again, are two separate things. For me, the process of doing research is so intrinsically tied to the research literature because I love that part of the process so much that it is hard for me to imagine doing research without that, right? On the other hand, to be fair, like people in the Julia Lab, people at MIT, people even at OIST, at some point you do need to sit down and actually do the research, right? And this is a matter of like whatever your experiment is. It could be that you're doing something in a wet lab for biology. It could be you're doing some software engineering experiment. It could be some GPU engineering. I don't know what it is, but you got something you got to do, right? You have a project and you have to do that project. And some people find that the doing is more enjoyable than like reading and writing and all that kind of stuff. It really depends on the person. It's just you just got to get in there and do the stuff, right? There's a comment here. I don't feel confident about how much I know to join a PhD program. Can you explain how much of the knowledge is expected to get into a good PhD program? Yeah, I intended to talk about that a little bit later with the question, am I good enough? But I think now is probably a good time to talk about that as well. So first of all, there are two things here that are kind of not... How do I put this? You can be a straight A student, right? A. You make all A's in all your classes. You could be good at physics, chemistry, bio, whatever it is. You could be the best student that anyone has ever seen come out of your university, yet you could not be very good at research, right? And the opposite could be true. You could be incredibly good at research, but not very good in classes. I was one of those people. I did fine in my classes. I was okay in my classes. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm the best researcher ever, but I loved research, right? And so the moment I started transforming the questions I was doing in class to research problems, I started doing really well. But before that, when I was just like listening to lectures, I suck at listening to lectures. I suck at like notebooks and stuff like this. I'm not good at that type of stuff, And so if you were to ask me, am I good enough to do a PhD? Honestly, I would have told you, yeah, I think I am. And the reason I would have said that is regardless of how well I'm doing in my classes, I know for a fact that I'm good at doing research. I love writing papers. I love reading papers. I love doing this kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, this question of am I good enough goes away. The more you engross yourself, the more you engage with the literature, you start trying to find these research problems and you find questions that you're sufficiently interested in solving. Again, it's not so much a question of, are you smart enough? Are you good enough? It's a question of, do you have enough motivation to push through the adversity, right? That's the question. And if you find yourself like really enjoying the process, then yeah, you probably do have that motivation, right? So I wouldn't frame this question as, am I good enough to do this thing? Frame it rather as, do I enjoy the process enough that I'm willing to put in the extra hours to make up for some shortcomings I might have in particular areas? That's the way you need to phrase that. And if you have that motivation, PhD is going to be great. Today, it has changed a lot. Now they let you go from bachelor degree straight to PhD. Yeah, I think this is true in Europe. It wasn't that way for a while. I thought I would get most exposure to CP-type problems in theory CS research, but a lot of computational programmers tend to go to HFTs. I don't even know what HFTs are. HFTs are, but not as software engineers, rather as quant researchers. Right. This is what I'm saying. If you are interested in solving this particular type of problem, you can probably get this problem not necessarily in a PhD. And in fact, I would argue it is a different type of problem, right, that you're looking for than the one you typically solve in a PhD. The problems that you're looking for do exist in a PhD program, but by and large, they exist more in like software industry and stuff like that. Before you had to go BS, masters, and PhD. So let's just clear something up. In the US, you also have the system where you have to go bachelor's, master's, and then PhD. It's just that the PhD program in the US is typically tied to the master's program. So as you are doing your PhD, you'll get the master's halfway through. Typically, the way this works is you spend 2 years doing your master's, where you're taking classes still, and you are how do I put this? You're taking classes, you are teaching classes usually, because that's where a lot of the like lectures for early undergraduate education comes from, is from people doing their master's program. And at the end of this, you'll take some sort of qualification exam. And by the time you finish the qualification exam, you will then learn, okay, when you finish the qualification exam, then you start doing the PhD properly. And this is when you start doing basically research exclusively for the next 3 years, depending on whether you still have to teach or not. We'll talk about that when we start talking about money down here. Let's see, exactly. I feel like I know less about machine learning, even though I have a master's in AI ML, but I feel like my foundation is weak. And people get into good PhD programs without knowing much. It depends. Again, it all really depends on your level of research and basically, like, did you email the professor? Have you shown interest in their work before? You know, like, this is what it matters. It's about connecting with the people. When you get into a PhD program, what you're looking for is a good advisor. You're looking for someone who likes you and you like them back, in such a way that you know that you will have a good working relationship for the next 5 years. Like, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for a good working relationship for the next 5 years where you respect each other's boundaries and know you can push each other in the right way to get work done. That's what you're looking for, right? And as long as you find that person that you're willing to work with, then you can generally get into any PhD program, right? You just need to find the right person who's willing to vouch for you in the admissions committee. That's why I'm working to get a master's first. Do you know if there is any research coming from Russia? I live here and I'm afraid our academia is too disconnected, so I think it's about going somewhere else. So I know a couple people who used to do, I know a couple Russians, right? In general, Russia, I think, still has like some of the best pure mathematics of anywhere. Like, I mean, Russian math is notoriously well known. I might be making that up. Maybe that's no longer true. But certainly finding places in which you can do internships outside of Russia is a good idea. I know a lot of people who did this as well. It really depends on your specific research field. To be fair, Russia is a particularly difficult situation because there's a lot of a lot of people just don't allow Russians to leave the country. I don't want to get into the socio-political, I don't want to get into politics here, but because of some issues with due to political issues, Russia is kind of sometimes hard to collaborate with Russian researchers. That's what it is. However, research nowadays is incredibly international. Like, for me, I did my undergraduate at Auburn University in Alabama. I then did my PhD in Japan. I then went back up to Boston to do MIT work, and now I live in Barcelona, where my wife is doing a lot of research here. The fact is that I'm saying, find the right person to work with, and keep in mind, this might not be a U.S. university. They might be working in Japan. They might be working in Europe. They might be working anywhere, right? The point is, you got to find the right person, right? Generally, when it comes to these research fields, everybody knows everybody because there's only 10 or 20 people actually working on this particular part or this particular research problem, pushing the boundary of knowledge in that particular way, So, because everybody knows everybody, it's this place where, you find a professor you want to work with, you email them. They might not have a spot available in their lab, but what they might know is someone else who has funding available for a PhD program, right? So basically, you just need to find the right person who's willing to take you on and is willing to vouch for you and get you into the network. And then once you're in that network, you can kind of go from there. If you go from competitive programming to computer science degree, then you will love it. Why? You already have multiple CP examples about the CS theory. The instructor will be teaching you, and everyone will just click and make sense. There is and there is research topics at least engineering where Russia is strong. High frequency trading. I should have known high frequency trading. One difference between academic research and more day-to-day research in software engineering, for example, is the fact that you usually know that your problem is solvable in software engineering. That is a true statement. So one core issue that I've seen some of my fellow PhD students suffer from is that, they'll be years into studying a particular problem for their PhD, and then after that they realize, actually there was a flaw like way back in the day, or like there's something wrong with their initial premise that they're trying to solve, right? And unfortunately, a couple years of work goes down the drain. This does happen. It's very discouraging when it happens. Usually you can pivot the results into something else, something that could even be better than the original paper that you were intending to publish. But more likely than not, just the process of trying to do research, even if it came up with a null result, helps you in doing other research projects down the line. So maybe it took you a year and a half to do that last research project. Now it only take a couple months to do the next one, right? Because you've already gone through the process of learning how to learn in this way. You know what I mean? Thank you. That gives me some hope. Did you already answer why do you like OpenBox? It's not PhD related. I just like OpenBox. It's the simplest of the Windows managers, and it's nice. That's it. I have no other reason. I just like it. Since you are at MIT, can I ask about a professor at MIT? I suspect I might be an issue to discuss on stream. You can ask. I don't know if I can actually discuss it on stream because I work remotely for MIT. I really only know the people in the Julia lab and some other people I've collaborated with at MIT. I don't know that many people. So I don't know if I can actually help here. Getting a student visa might get you out. Yeah, it might be hard to get a student visa. Forever stuck in solving the Collatz conjecture. So this is the thing, guys. When you're doing research, this is kind of a problem with marketing, right? I'm gonna say this is a problem with marketing. See, when people think about research, they think about the big problems. They think about, like, I don't know, alien life on Mars. Like, what is dark matter? I don't know. They think about string theory. They think about these big problems that are like, I don't know, just things that interest you as a kid, and they think to themselves, man, I want to solve these problems, right? And it is true that these are big problems that people are working towards. Okay, maybe not the alien one, but like the alien one does actually have some astrobiology stuff. But anyway, look, the fact is, it's always going to be like this big problem that people are working towards. But remember, that is a big problem that people have been working towards for years. It's not your problem to solve that. Like, the PhD is not going to be your attempt to solve some big grand problem that has been like, people have been struggling to solve for hundreds of thousands of years. Like, this is not what the PhD is for. The PhD is to target a much smaller problem, something that you almost certainly can complete in a couple years. And not only can you complete, it will get your foot in the door so that you can start learning more and applying that knowledge to maybe solve the bigger problems down the road, right? The stuff that will take a big research group that you will probably have to be running yourself at some point. You know what I mean? Like, so when we're talking about the PhD, do not focus on the big problems, right? Focus on small little research bits that you feel like, hey, this is interesting enough to devote some time to solving, right? This is what you're looking for. Don't look big, look small, right? That's one of my big pieces of advice. Because the bigger you go, I mean, to be honest, the harder you're going to fall when things fail, right? You got to make sure that you're tackling a problem that seems sufficiently doable. And the way to tell whether something is doable or not is just to read more papers. Keep reading until you feel like you have such a good grasp of this particular problem that you feel like you can do it, whatever that thing is. Getting student visa is pretty hard, but I look into it. So you need someone to get the student visa, you have to have someone to, again, vouch for you in the admissions committee. They have to help you out with that process. And then after, you probably want to switch somewhere else. Yeah, this is the other thing too. Oh man, I'm way behind on chat. I'm gonna catch up. Okay. Just after completing your undergraduate, if one wants to go for a PhD, the idea seems to be a little overwhelming, whether one can handle finishing off their PhD. Do we make sure that we can handle that? One second, I got a cough. So your question was regarding, you just finished your undergraduate. Basically, are you good enough to do the PhD, right? If you're in a US system, I would say just go for the PhD. And the reason I would say make that claim is because you get a master's kind of in the process of doing a PhD in the US system. If you're in Europe, the answer is kind of solved for you already. Just get a master's, right? That's what the master's is there for. It's kind of a buffer zone between you and the actual academic research to determine whether this is something you actually want to do or not, right? Did your salary increase after getting the PhD? No, actually, it did not. So not substantially. So I was quite lucky in that So most PhDs, specifically if you're doing STEM PhDs, are paid for, right? In some way, whether that be because you are doing teaching for the university and they pay you for the teaching, or because they're paying for you for the research that you're doing, right? So because I was at OIST, they paid 2.4 million yen, which at the time, because of the exchange rate, was something like 20,000 US dollars, right? And they also paid for 80% of my housing. So I was able to pocket a lot of money during the PhD. More than that, I got a scholarship or a grant from the Japanese Society for the Promotion of Science, where I also was able to top off the amount of money that I was making to 3 million yen. Now, again, with the exchange rate, that's not quite as good as it used to be, but that meant that I was making enough money to live comfortably and save a lot of money. Even to this day, the majority of my savings came from my PhD, not post-PhD. Now, with that said, I have actually not been optimizing for salary, right? If I were to be optimizing for salary, then I probably could be making enough money that, like, this would not be true. Probably the PhD would net me some sort of income. But I really and truly, I did my postdoc at MIT. They paid me, I think it was $60,000, which sounds like a lot, but then you realize you're in Boston and it costs you so much more to live there that it ends up being you're making less money at the end of the day. And then basically I worked for a year for 3 Blue and Brown, and I didn't make that much money during that year, and I'm working remotely, and I can only really get so many hours in a week. So I personally have not seen, I'm not making much money. Right now I'm basically making no money. But that's because I decided to make no money. Now, if we're talking about in general, do you make more money after getting a PhD? The answer is, I mean, yes, you make more money than a student, but less money than a software engineer. People just don't pay researchers what they're worth. In general, I think the average postdoc salary is like $45,000 per year or something like this. Maybe it's more now, but it's quite little. Like, it's basically less than minimum wage. You would make more money probably just working a minimum wage job than you would getting a PhD and going through the system. The only reason you do a PhD is because you like doing research and it's something you want to keep doing. That's it. It's not for money. Only if you get places like OpenAI, Google DeepMind. I'm going to skip through because I'm behind on chat, but if you guys want me to read something, feel free to say it more. Then you get to Titan 1 single screw, also mentally. Internet 2, another of Leo's Labs episode. Welcome, hello world of back people. What's up? How are you, DS Jost? The PhD is not like I go to PhD to make a thesis that will find the cure to cancer. It's more like I want to master via mentorship apprenticeship model how to do what my mentor cancer research does, because I aim to find the cure to cancer. Exactly. That's a good way to put it. The exception is machine learning. However, it's very competitive for the money thing. Yeah, you're right. So there are some exceptions here to what I was talking about with the money thing. Like, for example, if you're doing biology, typically biology PhDs are not paid as much as, like, let's say computer science PhDs, right? And the core reason is that there's a lot of competition in computer science. It's a very hotly, it's a field that everyone wants. Meanwhile, when it comes to biology, there's just so many biology PhDs out there that there's just too much competition. It's a supply and demand type of thing, Okay. So while we're talking about this, let's talk a little bit about the academic rat race, okay? Let's talk about what it means to be a professor. Since we were talking about money, at the end of the day, when people want to do a PhD, typically, because academics are relatively biased towards continuing in academia, people generally, when you go into a PhD, want to continue doing research and staying in the academic system as long as possible. And the end goal for that is to be a full professor. So what does this mean? You do your PhD, right? This is going to be 5 years. On average, maybe more, maybe less. Then you do a postdoc, right? Then you do another postdoc. And then usually you do a third postdoc. Each of these are 2 years, right? So this is 6 years total. So I'll go ahead and put a 2 next to this one, and a 2 next to this one, and a 2 next to this one, all right? Then after that, you do assistant professor. So assistant professor. Then you go to associate professor, and then you go to full professor. And I'm going to move these down to the next line because these are kind of different than the lines before. So assistant professor, let me do a tab as well. Associate professor, and then finally full professor. Okay, so let's talk. What does it mean? So you do a PhD for 5 years. So you just finished undergraduate. How old are you at the end of undergraduate? Probably 22 years old, right? So you do 5 years PhD, you're 27. 3 postdocs, each for 6 years. You're now 33 years old, right? You do assistant professorship, 33 to maybe 36, right? Associate professor, let's say at best you're full professor at maybe the year age 40, right? That's what it is. You got to the full professorship at the age of 40. Now, what do you get at full professor? You get what Void 42 said, tenure. Now, what is tenure? Tenure is essentially a little piece of paper that the university gives you that says you are very unlikely to be fired. That's what it says. Now, it doesn't mean you can't be fired. You still can be fired. It just means you're less likely to be fired. That's what it means. Now, why do they give full professors tenure? The reason is because over the course of your time working as an assistant professor and an associate professor, you've gotten so much money for the university, they say, all right, man, you're good. You don't have to make us more money. Now you can research whatever you want to do. So let's talk about the process from PhD to full professor. What does this mean? Hey, Amaris, by the way. So PhD. You start your PhD. Let's say, I don't know what you're doing. Let's say you're doing climate science. You do your PhD in climate science, doing some sort of study, right? In doing so, you created some particular mathematical model that allows particular climate simulations to be a little bit more accurate, right? You continue that work into your first postdoc, where you not only do climate science, but you also start doing ocean simulations. And then you become this guy who does like the atmosphere ocean merger guy. Like that's your thing. You're the only person that can do this simulation that merges the results from the ocean and the atmosphere in a way that makes sense, right? Second postdoc, you realize, oh, actually, this method is also good with astrophysics. So you do astrophysics, right? Finally, the third postdoc is when you finally make a big deal and you get some publication in let's say, Nature or Science, some big journal, right? And finally, you say to yourself, all right, that's enough. I've done enough of this climate science stuff. I'm finally able to apply for assistant professorships. So you apply for assistant professorships, right? There, you now start building your own research lab. You apply for funding from grants, and that's basically your whole job, applying for funding again and again and again and again and again, and hoping that eventually you get money so you can fund more people in your lab to do more research, probably in the same area you've been doing research in for the past, like, I don't know, 10, 20 years, just so that you can get, so that you can get more funding to hire more people, right? That's what it is. Eventually, you've got enough funding from the government, from people, that the university says, hey, man, you've got a lot of funding, right? You're doing a really good job with this funding. And hey, just for the record, for people who don't know, when an assistant professor gets money for their lab, half of that money goes to the university, right? And so this is why you're put up the academic ladder. Like, this is what brings you up the academic ladder. It's not so much your teaching abilities. Sometimes people care about teaching, but most of the time they don't. It's your ability to bring money into the university, right? And so as you're bringing money in, they take half of your money and you start funding a bigger lab, right? So you fund a bigger lab and you fund a bigger lab and a bigger lab. And eventually, after continuing to fund the bigger lab and bigger lab and bigger lab, they're like, hey man, you've made a couple $1 million for our university system. That's good. You're full tenure. Now you can research whatever the heck you've wanted to do. So you've just spent the past 20 years of your life studying a particular topic, becoming a world-leading expert in that particular topic. And then finally, after all that is done, you can take a step back and you can say, okay, did I actually enjoy researching that thing, or should I study something else entirely, right? And this is why you see so many kind of kooky full professors, because this process of doing research for so long and being kind of how do I put this? It takes a lot of time and effort to write papers, to fund your research lab, to run your research lab, to teach classes, to do everything else. I mean, there's a reason why when you email a professor at 2 o'clock in the morning, they will respond like that, because they're usually up already because they're doing so much work. You know what I mean? And so when all that is said, it ends up being just a lot of work over a long period of time that is, it very easily lends itself to burnout, right? And it's very hard to consider, I don't know, it's very hard to consider what you actually want to do. Like in your heart, you still like doing research, but you're very tired of the climate stuff. Basically my point is that can you be a professor? The answer is maybe, right? And it's a big maybe, because at every step of this process, right, you do the PhD, you do the postdoc, you do another postdoc, you do another postdoc, the burnout builds up, and people will leave, right? And so when you finish your PhD, there could be 30 people in your class. When you finish the first postdoc, most of those people have already left. Only 10% finished their first postdoc. I remember the exact statistics, but certainly between the PhD and assistant professor, it's only 10% of people who get the PhD actually become an assistant professor. And then to continue along this path, once you're an assistant professor, it's usual, you usually do. But again, you can be kicked out by the university at the assistant or associate professor level. So point is, you could, in principle, be a professor. It is possible, right? But it takes a lot of work, and you are probably going to get burnt out, and it's going to be a pain, right? You have to give up so much. You're going to be working 100-hour weeks basically your entire life. That's what you have to do for the next 20 years to make this work, right? Are you okay with that? Or do you want to go to industry where they have actually some, some semblance of work-life balance, right? It's not great, but at least some semblance of work-life balance. Now, to be fair, academics nowadays are becoming more and more like used to the idea of work-life balance. Like they allow you to have flexible hours as long as you're constantly working, so it's kind of like, it's fine. Like it's becoming more of a norm. But certainly it's not just, there were days during the PhD and during the postdoc at MIT where I just consistently thought to myself, man, I wish I could just walk into the office at 9 and leave at 5. That would be so nice. Just like imagine having weekends free. Imagine just taking a step back, not being up until midnight on Mother's Day because I'm like, I have to finish this grant that must be out tomorrow. Otherwise the deadlines are going to be passed. And it's so much stuff. It's like, man, I just wish I could just take a break, but you can't. And that's the problem with the academic process. You can't take a break, because at any step, if you take a break, there's 100 other people who also have PhDs that can kick you out, right? And so this is the negative side of doing the PhD. You enter this pool of people who are all incredibly motivated and honestly don't have great social skills, who are all trying to get the same job that you're trying to get, So let me go ahead and catch up on chat here. What's needed to publish a research paper? To be honest, it depends on your field, but in general, what you need to do is you need to make sure that you've done something that people have not done before. That's it. So if you can do something that has not been done and that people see as necessary to be done, then it's good, right? So the two metrics to judge whether a paper is worth being published or not is one, methodology. Is the study that you did a good study? Like, are the results that you've shown valid results, right? That's number one. Number two, are the results good? Like, do people care about the results, right? And so as a PhD student, probably going into the PhD, in general, you can probably find your way about doing number one. You can probably find a way of doing research with a good methodology to make sure that the results are actually valid, right? But step two, trying to make sure that your paper actually has a meaningful impact within the community is quite hard, right? And so that's where you need the PhD advisor to come in and say, yo, this is what you actually need to do to get the paper published and cited by other people, right? And in general, it does depend on the field, right? Biology is quite different than computational physics, which is what I kind of do and what I know. And so it's, keep in mind I'm very biased here, but in general, this is what you need the professor for. That's what you need to do the PhD for. It's what enables you to figure out what the actual details are to get the research paper published. What do you think about Australia for research? I know a lot of researchers in Australia. They're actually pretty good in certain areas. I don't have any issues with it. I think it's great. If it doesn't work, you can always grift on YouTube. Yeah, that's what I'm doing, isn't it? Depends on whether you want to publish at a journal or conference in your field. Oh, and the other thing too is journals and conferences, they're different. So for computer science, in general, some of the best journals are actually conferences, right? So for example, SIGGRAPH, it's like the biggest computer graphics journal, or biggest computer graphics conference, has the highest cited papers in the field, right? This happens in several areas of computer science, but it's not true in all areas. Like for example, in physics, PRL, Phys Rev Letters, and Nature are kind of the two big places that you want to publish in. Noctua, what is the reason for labs not going independent? Let's talk about that. Money issue here, independent. We'll talk about that in a bit. I'm adding it to the list. I've got other, let me catch up on chat, then we'll talk about that in a bit. You could work 20 years in industry, save money, and then retire and research what you want. Actually, I know people who have done that. Like this is not even a weird thing to do. I know people who do that, specifically in computer science. You could do industry for a bit, right? And then come back for your PhD. And then after you do the PhD, then go to academia, right? When you're not, because you already have the money, you don't need to worry so much. You don't need to stress so much about this as a career. Just do it until you're bored, right? That's it. And I know people who've done that. It's actually a really good way to just, it's a more relaxed way of going through the PhD process. Now, one big downside to that is money. In that a lot of the grants that you need to get for your PhD require you to be a little bit younger, right? They require you to be coming off of an undergraduate or something like that. So in order to make, 2.4 million yen, like I did, going to my PhD or something like this. For most systems, again, not OIST, but most systems, they do require you to be coming off of an undergraduate or master's program. It's just, for some reason, the way it works. I don't know why. Not all programs, but a lot of them. And this might have changed in the past few years, but that's how it was when I finished my undergraduate. Here in Europe, you don't get tenure if you don't publish within these 5-6 years. Being in industry, you basically drop out of academia and be banished. This is quite common. Like, that's what happens, right? So for me, in particular, I have not published papers in a while. So, like, if I want to go back into academia and if I want to enter this race again, it's going to be quite hard. I've got some papers I intend to publish in the future, and I'm hoping to do some of that live on stream. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But then you work for 20 years in industry. That's true too, right? And the question is, what is worse, 20 years in industry or 20 years doing the PhD? And depending on who you ask, you're going to get completely different result or different answers, right? If you ask someone who's in the middle of their postdoc, these guys, postdoc 2, man, I can tell you, these guys, all they want to do is go into work at 9 and leave at 5, and that's it. They just want a job. That's it. But they feel like they've kind of, it's like sunk cost fallacy. They've been in the process for so long that they don't want to leave, right? And so if you ask a postdoc, should you go into industry? They're going to tell you, yeah, you should probably go into industry. Screw the academic system. It's not worth it. But if you ask someone in industry, should you go do a PhD? They're probably going to say, yeah, man, those academics, they don't really work. They don't do anything. You know what I mean? Like, it really depends on who you're asking and why you're asking those questions, right? I feel like I already gave up a lot and I'm not even through my PhD yet. Yeah, I mean, this is true too. So when we talk about money, what we are not also talking about is the following, right? So let me explain something. Journal, new page before. So let's have the money discussion. Okay, let me catch up on chat, then we'll have the money discussion. There's a couple things related here. So one, do you make more money? 2, how do to pay for a PhD? 3, why not go independent? Dent, for labs. And then what's number 4? There's probably some other things to do with money. Give me more questions related to money, and I'll talk about that. I feel like I already gave up a lot. You make more money. Cost, benefit of PhD. All right, these are things to talk about. Just be like Paul Erdos, travel and crash at a researcher's place and solve math problems with them, and then dip out. The ideal life. Yeah, so, streamers, like let's say Ludwig or like Pirate Software or these like big streamers, I feel like people watching me probably know a lot of these streamers as well. You know how they're just constantly working? Like they're always live, they're always doing something like this. Like, sure, okay, maybe the content they're making isn't like super great, like you could say they're just reacting to stuff, but like Pirate Software, he's always live, because if he's not live and if he's not making content, then he's basically not visible, right? And in some sense, this idea of just constantly being live and constantly doing what you can to push where you can, then that's kind of what researchers are. So instead of like going home and playing a video game, these guys go home and solve math problems, not necessarily because they love solving math problems, but because they know if they don't do this as their hobby as well as their job, they're going to fall behind, right? Anyway, there's a lot more to say here. I've got a lot to catch up on. How old are you? What age did you do a PhD? Is there any way to save this video after the live ends? It should be saved automatically. That's why I'm live streaming on YouTube as well. I'm currently 32, so I finished my PhD in 2019, so that would have been 22, how old was I? 29, 28, something like this. I've worked at MIT for the past 5 years, roughly. Yeah. Many professors I know have stable pay and a great pension. That's true as well, right? Once you get to the professor job, it's a pretty good job. Once you're a full professor, right? You're 50 years old, you're finally a full professor. It's great, man. You teach some classes, you relax, you only do research when you want to. That is great, right? But the question is, how do you get there, right? And getting there is so hard that it kind of leads you down a route that is very difficult for most people, is what I would say. The hardest part is getting the funding, I guess. I miss this. I'm curious about people who have successfully completed the gentleman scientist route. Get a master's or PhD, but then leave academia and self-publish. Must be extremely rare. Yeah, we'll talk about that with going independent for labs. We'll talk about that. Self-funded. To infiltrate a conference sounds easier and close to the domain of research I'm doing. Do you do like oh, I don't know, what would it be, like cryptography type of thing? You have a lot of lucrative options after CS PhD, but this is not true for other subjects. Yeah, that's true as well. What I always tell people during the PhD is that you should be focusing on skills that you could use later on in life, right? So when I did my PhD at OIST, I specifically targeted a particular project that would give me not only the physical skills that I needed, because it was a physics PhD, but also the computational skills, right? I wanted to know GPU engineering because I knew that that would be a hot field that would be useful in the future. And that allowed me to transition into a job that I kind of liked a little bit more than my PhD, you know? Many full CS professors have more than one job, a lot of consultancy and stuff like that. They're bringing in almost $1 million through it all. It depends on the CS professor. I think over almost $1 million per year is a bit much. I don't think most CS professors make anywhere near that amount. But I will say that it is common for CS professors to also have a side job as well, right? But only when they're full professors, right? Getting to that point takes a while. But also CS it's quite different than the other fields, right? Because there's so much competition with industry, it's very difficult to, how do I put this? You can't really compare it to biology, where there is there is some competition. Let's say chemistry, where there isn't as much competition outside of academia, right? It's just a completely different ballgame, you know? I'm going to finish my bachelor's and then get rich with business and start up. That is a more viable strategy, I would argue, than going for the PhD. I know people who have done that, right? Meanwhile, I don't know anyone who has become a professor at this point in my group. This video is great. I don't know how I haven't found you before. I'm glad you're here. I went to Okinawa. Yep. Let's see. I'm currently doing a PhD and would love to spend some time in Japan as a visitor. So, okay. In terms of OIST, the PhD program that I went to, the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, I'm going to come out and say it. OIST, I'm just going to put it out here, was great. I liked it. It was fantastic for me. But I do not know if I recommend it for everybody, right? Like I said before, doing a PhD, having a good time during your PhD is largely dependent on your academic advisor, right? And there are good advisors and there are bad advisors. And at OIST, there are good advisors and there are bad advisors, just like everywhere else, right? And so basically, when you go into a PhD program, just kind of have an idea in the back of your head of who you want to work for and why you want to work for that person. And email them, talk to them, make sure they're cool people, like basically vet them. Don't just enter the program and just expect to find your way into the lab. No, kick the door open, say, this is where I want to work. Do you have a position available? How would I start doing research in this area? Professors love answering these types of questions. Sometimes they're busy and they don't have time, but these are the questions that they really enjoy answering. Okay, I'm currently doing PhD. Okay. Are you part of the Rust core team? I'm developing Rustling in our team at some company. Yeah, I mean, just for the record, I'm actually, I'm going to say this just so everyone knows my biases. When we start talking about the computer science stuff, keep in mind, my biases are very clear here. I currently work for the Julia Lab at MIT, So in terms of people who have kind of made it through academia, like I'm not going to say like I'm in the top, but I'm saying that like I went to OIST, I did my PhD, I went to MIT, like, not everyone is as fortunate as I am to work in such like high, like good positions. You know what I mean? A lot of people end up working their postdoc and being kind of like chewed out by some advisor who doesn't really know, like doesn't care about work-life balance. Like I was very lucky and I very specifically chose the places that I went to. So as to avoid burnout, and I was still burnt out significantly. You know what I mean? Anyway, let's keep going. Becoming successful with a startup seems more likely than getting to a professorship. Not talking about becoming a multimillionaire necessarily, but let's say independently wealthy. Right. I agree with that statement. Let's talk about money. So we already answered one question. Do you make more money after the PhD? The answer generally is no. Okay. You will probably make more money if you just want to be a software engineer. That's, to be honest, software engineering pays like $100,000 per year on average. That is the amount of money that you're making as a full professor. You will be making that money at the end of your career if you do the PhD route, whereas you're making that in kind of mid-career if you do the software engineering route. So you're not making more money doing a PhD. And again, doing the PhD will close a lot of doors. You'll be overqualified for a lot of these positions that you wouldn't be overqualified for before. On the other hand, the jobs change. So instead of doing engineering jobs, which is what you'd be doing if you went straight software engineering, you're now doing research jobs. And though there are fewer of these doors available, again, like I said before, the number of people applying for these jobs are smaller as well. And in general, because you do research in the area, you'll find the right community and you'll probably be able to find a job. So will you make more money? No. But I'd like to think that the stuff that you're doing is more interesting, and maybe that is something that you find that you value, right? And so don't do the PhD for money. Do the PhD for the purpose of doing research. That's it. Again, that's the reason. If you want to be a professor and get tenure, I mean, I guess you can go for that. But again, it's such a small shot. Just do it if you want to do research. There's plenty of really good industry research jobs available as well. And those are the jobs that you'll probably find yourself in. Okay, chat's going kind of quick. Let me catch up. Let's see. Related with all of this, would it be worth it to do a PhD when you're disabled? Oh, wait. That's a good question. One second. Let me catch up. I'm not, but my mentor is the compiler team. Okay, fair enough. Did you feel like that the atmosphere at MIT was different than anywhere else you research? As in, just being at MIT made you feel a lot of satisfaction? Yeah, we can talk about that. So let's talk about the MIT effect. MIT effect. All right. So I worked at MIT, right? I'm still technically working for MIT. There's something that's called the MIT effect, and it's kind of vaguely defined. But essentially, if you publish a paper or go for a grant or something like that, you are more likely to get it specifically because you have @mit.edu in your email. It happens all the time. But there are other effects here as well. And I don't really know how to describe these effects, but there is a feeling of, not everyone has this, but there's a feeling of mutual respect and almost, not superiority, but it's a feeling of like, you walk into a room, people generally assume that the other person you're talking to is smart, right? And so they kind of skip past any of these, like, you could argue like simpler discussion points and go right to the heart of things that are challenging to them, which can be beneficial and cannot be, right? You get this vibe where people are maybe trying to show off their jargon, and it ends up becoming a little annoying. Now, I'm lucky in that the Julia Lab does not do this. And this did not appear so much in the projects that I was working on. But basically, people at MIT generally are not very good at working interdisciplinary, right? Which is fine. They're not an interdisciplinary group. But this is in stark contrast to OIST. So OIST, the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, where I went to for my PhD, I mean, it's incredibly diverse. So I worked in a lab with roughly 20 people in it. And in this lab with 20 people in it, half of them were women, and we had like 15 countries represented. Like, it was incredibly international, incredibly diverse. Like, it was great. And the discussion points, because OIST was interdisciplinary, were at a level that anyone could understand for any reason, and that was also great. To then go to MIT, it just so happened that my specific research group was all like white men. There were like a few white women, but at the time, like, the diversity gap was huge. Like, there was basically, it felt suffocating because I was not used to this type of conversation with people that were all white men. You know, that was just my specific research group, and it's not that way over all MIT. But for my specific research group, that was something I was like, wow, this is quite weird. I feel off in this room. And then the way in which they were talking was also at a level where I felt like you didn't need to use this jargon there. You know what I mean? So did being at MIT make me feel satisfied? I mean, I don't know, like, you go to MIT to pad your CV in a sense, and I guess I did do that in a way, but to be honest, the reason I went to MIT was because I had a good friend who worked there at the Julia Lab, and, you know, he's still one of my best friends, and he does some really good research, and I really wanted to do research with him, and that was what I did. I did an okay job, not as well as I could have. There was a lot of burnout there that I probably would not have had if I would have gone my own route. But I don't know if I necessarily regret going either. It's one of those things that the answer is complicated, is what I want to say. But academics are academics everywhere. And generally you get the same vibe wherever you go. And so even though there was a stark contrast between OIST and MIT, I still feel like there's still some vibes you get. You know, there's still some people who are like physicists who feel like computationalists are like bad for some reason. You know what I mean? Like, there's still going to be academics everywhere who have like weird opinions that they take as fact just because, I don't know, it's worked for them for the past 20 years. Anyway, it's hard to answer this question. I'm going to catch up on YouTube chat in just a second. Let me scroll down on Twitch. We're going to Rust made me want to try making my own language. Everyone wants to make their own language. That's just what it is. Related to this, would it be worth it to do a PhD when you're disabled? I think it depends on what the disability is, but in general, I know a lot of people who are disabled who do PhDs. And because, you know, on the one hand, it is a lot of work. And if you're not able to do the work, you probably won't make it as an academic. On the other hand, I do find that, I'm just going to say it as it is, people are very welcoming of any community that is willing to do the work. So it doesn't matter if you're, it doesn't matter where you're from, what your background is. It doesn't matter your identity, any of this kind of stuff. As long as you're able to put in the work, people generally will respect you. Now, there are certainly some outliers, and the older generations are, look, you've got some sexism, some racism, some misogyny, like as you would expect. In older generations, but the newer generations generally are more accepting, and I find that they're more accepting than like the I would say the trend of the population outside of academia is what I would say. Bring back Bell Labs. We can talk about Bell Labs. I'm still not there yet. Sorry, I've got a lot to talk about. Diversity and interdisciplinary makes research so much better. 100%. How's it going? It's going great. Thanks for asking. I've recently dived into the type theory and some of the category theory, and my love of math has been restored after different equations and hydrodynamics. Matt, this is what I'm talking about. If you find research exciting, that it's the most exciting thing to me is seeing people excited by research. That's what it is. Any more imposter syndrome at MIT, or is it like that at most places in academia? It is always, imposter syndrome is rampant. But that's everywhere. In fact, I would argue it's maybe less at MIT because you get like a seal of approval. I don't know. Anyway, so for those who don't know, imposter syndrome is the feeling that you're an imposter, like you are pretending to be somebody, but the person you're pretending to be is yourself, right? So the idea is that, I'm James Schloss. I've always been James Schloss, but people perceive me to be a different person than who I internally perceive myself to be, right? And because of that difference in perception, I find myself kind of playing the puppet. You know what I mean? Like I'm trying to act like how people think I'm supposed to be, not who I actually am. You know what I mean? And it ends up becoming really bad, specifically for people who have are in STEM fields or like highly technical fields, because the people in these fields have other people depending on whether they're correct or not, right? So like you could say, oh, generally, X is this way, or whatever it is. You have some sort of fact that you're presenting, right? And you have to really prove that that fact is correct. And so you will say something that is true, and it's true. Everyone else knows it's true, but there is like a feeling deep down that you're not smart enough to actually make the claims that you're actually making, right? This is very common in academic settings. It's more common in women, but men also suffer from it as well. It's like 42% or something like that in men, and like 60% in women in technical fields. It's like high for people who actually experience this. What do you think about category theory? I don't have very strong opinions, and I wish I did. Let's see. Let me catch up on YouTube chat. I've got two chats here. I've been missing a lot of YouTube chat. Whoa. Lots of stuff I missed down here. Is this where? Okay, here we are. In a good way to account for the non-tangibles of pursuing a PhD. Currently a PhD student, I really like things like the classes and freedom to tackle exciting questions. This is how I always say it, right? And I might be wrong here, but this is what I always say. I say that what you need to do is to compare yourself like to who you were 6 months ago, all right? During the PhD, I found that if I compared myself to who I was a few months ago, every single time I made the comparison, I found myself improving in some way. And I could tangibly, I could write down the ways in which I've gotten better. I've learned these things. I've done these things. I'm able to do stuff I was not able to do before. And during the PhD, that feeling of self-improvement is greater than at any other point in my life. And I think it will never be at that level again, And I've come to accept that it will never be at that level again. And so when you're talking about non-tangible things that you get from the PhD, that feeling of being able to improve yourself step by step is something that you just don't get anywhere else. And it's remarkable. It truly is remarkable. And depending on your field, you're going to get a lot of these non-tangible, things, non-tangible, tangible things. You know what I mean? Like you're going to get a lot of these. And that's... It's hard to put those into words. Now, again, like I said before, when you're doing the PhD, you should also be targeting things that are not directly related to your research, right? Like if you're doing biology, maybe it makes sense to go down the computational route, do a little bit of bioinformatics, learn a little bit about how to do Python scripting, stuff like this. Like just because getting those additional skills will help you down the line, right? So don't hyperfixate on your specific problem. Do your best to learn as much as you can on adjacent fields as well, because in learning this interdisciplinary stuff, eventually you start to be able to do things that you couldn't do before, push boundaries that you weren't able to do before and that you didn't even know existed before, right? Are there such opportunities in industry too? In order to do research, yes, I mean, there's plenty of opportunities in research. And I wanted to talk a little bit later about doing research without necessarily having a PhD. There are different routes in order to pursue research without going down the academic route. They're not as common, but for example, you could go into a Department of Energy lab or something like this in the US, a national lab. These exist all over the world. There's like RIKEN in Japan. And if you go to these places, there's a lot of research being done by people who don't have PhDs. And instead they do like scientist levels, which you can kind of go up different rungs of the ladder in these levels in a very similar way to the academic process. But one core advantage of going through the DOE labs is that they force you to work 40 hours a week. So they basically do not allow you to work overtime. Well, depending on the lab. Some labs are pretty bad, but Los Alamos at least was that way. So there's advantages and disadvantages to going that route. But I would say by and large, if you want to do research, doing the PhD does not hurt. It's going to help you out with that. Assuming you can pay for it, which we'll talk about as soon as I finish catching up on chat. I reckon after startup exit or business exit, I'll do a PhD and make the biggest impact I can in longevity research. What do you think about longevity? I think it's interesting. I don't know enough about it because I don't know anything about biology, right? I mean, I know a bit, but not enough for me to say anything about this type of stuff. But it sounds to me like one of those big, ambitious goals that is going to be impossible for any single person to target without like a heck of a huge lab, like a giant lab. So what you should be focusing on then is not necessarily funding yourself and being a single lone researcher tackling the world, but instead finding ways to sustainably fund an entire lab, right? That's what you should be focusing on. And the academic system, whether, for better or for worse, does have ways in which you can fund an entire lab. This is not common outside of academia. And again, we'll talk about independent labs. This is on the list of things I want to talk about right now. Whoa, I missed something. A PhD from a Japanese university, competitive on the international market, both in industry or academia, or a PhD in Europe or US be better. I think you're thinking a little bit too much on the degree that you're going to get at the end, and not enough on the research you're going to be doing. It doesn't matter where your degree is from. It really doesn't. It matters who you worked with, right? If I went to MIT, but I worked with a professor who just nobody knows, well, what's the point, right? Because working with a professor that nobody knows at MIT, sure, it's great that I can put MIT down on my CV, okay, but like, does that actually help me down the line? It does not, because the point is to do more research. And if your point is to do more research, then it doesn't matter who you work with. It matters what papers you've published and the network you've created, right? So focus on that, right? And so going to OIST was great for me because it has a huge international network that I was able to take a part of. Tokyo, Kyoto, these are great universities. Osaka, they're really, really good universities in Japan that you can go to. Same is true for Europe. There's plenty of good universities. And in the US, there's obviously plenty of good universities there. But focus on the researcher, not necessarily the place to work at, right? You could go to University of Kentucky. There are really, really good researchers who are there. But it's a completely different vibe than the vibe you get at MIT. And going to Kentucky might not mean anything to people outside of, maybe like the plasma physics community or whatever group happens to be there. But for the people in the plasma physics community, they'll say, oh, did you work with this guy, right? Because they know. It's a small community. They know, right? And so don't focus so much on like where you're getting the degree from. Focus on the people you're working with. Overqualified is such a BS thing. What do you mean? I can do too many things. It's more just it's a hiring thing. The fear is if you do your PhD, you probably like doing research. And if your PhD, if you want to be hired for a traditional job after doing the PhD, the people in the hiring committee are afraid of two things. One, they probably have to pay you more because you have a PhD. And two, you might leave because the job is not interesting enough for you, right? And so it's not so much you're overqualified, it's that they're afraid you're a bad fit, and that fear will keep them from hiring you. You can still break open the door and you can still work for whoever you want to work with. It's just a matter of again, like breaking down those boundaries and proving that you are actually a good fit for the job, even though you do have a PhD, right? And not necessarily negative, it's just that like, it's something you have to keep in mind when trying to get a non-academic job or non-research job after having a PhD. Actually, many researchers do build startups based on their research. That's true. This happens all the time. One thing you have to keep in mind is if you are doing a startup based on your PhD research, you have to be very careful about who owns the copyright here. A lot of universities, for better or for worse, will take the copyright of basically anything that you're making during the PhD. Depends on how the wording of the document was done, but you have to be very, very careful to make sure that you're not violating the copyright and stealing your own work from the university. It's kind of it's a really bad system to be a part of. And personally, I'm pro universities giving their copyright back to the owners of the copyright. But usually if you're doing open source work, this is waived. And so for me, because I only do open source work, Yeah, it was okay, but I really did not like the fact that Oyster, really any university, MIT as well, take the copyright of you if you happen to do something great. They do, but for me, I think it's best to build business and start up first. It's personally me. I think, good. I'm almost done with YouTube chat, I think. Let's see. Oh, there's actually a bit here that I missed. Man, YouTube chat. What's your research topic? I'm going to skip this. How important is taking courses during a PhD versus free research? This depends on who you are. So for me in particular, I decided to go with OIST because it does research first. It is a research first university. They teach classes, but the classes are more or less, they're not as important as doing research. That made sense for me as someone who's not very good at learning through classes. But for other people who can learn very well in lectures, it does not work as well for them, right? And so it depends on the university, and you have to ask the program, right? For me, research will always be more important than classes. But you have to figure out how to answer that question on your own. Let's see. Which are relevant? Lucky. I always got imposter syndrome since elementary school. Yeah, I think everyone does. Very interesting. I think I'm caught up on YouTube chat. I think if I missed something, just type it again. Let me go ahead and catch up on Twitch chat. Man, I first of all, I really do appreciate all the conversation here. You guys are great. This is all stuff that I feel like is good to talk about, you know? Okay. So let's catch up on Twitch chat. What do you think about category theory? That'd be so cool. What if any positions exist in academia where you support research, but are not master's PhD postdoc professor? I've worked outside of academia for a few years now and miss it, but I don't miss the race to publish. Yeah, so there's a couple good positions. So for example, research, software is good. Research software engineering is great. Then there's also grant, how do I put it? Like grant administration. And then we can talk about working with grad schools, stuff like this. But I would say the biggest support group is probably the research software engineers, right? Working with IT, this type of stuff, like the people who run the supercomputer, the cluster, all this kind of stuff. Basically, people who run the resources and allow people to use the resources necessary to do research, right? There's a bunch of positions like this, but obviously fewer positions than if you were to just do industry. And else is just so different than pyramid. I mean, it's the main problem, so I'm sure I would be able to do the work since I get so tired easily. That's the main problem. I'm not sure I'd be able to do the work since I get so tired easily. So the thing is, Amaris, from what I've seen, if you're asking for yourself, to be honest, I think you can do it. I mean, you've been so helpful and you're so good at the conversation here. I think you're putting yourself down, and you actually have a significant, you have more advantages than disadvantages is what I'm trying to say. If you're questioning whether you can do it, I'm positive you, as a member of this community and someone that I feel like I know at maybe not a deep personal level, but I've seen time and time again prove themselves, I think you can do it. That's it. I would, if you're worried about not being good enough, I can guarantee that you as an individual are, at least from what I've seen. I find research exciting, but I'm too obsessed with financial security. Yeah, I mean, you will be financially secure probably going down this route, but it's you will make more money elsewhere. If you're in CS, then industry research is also very exciting, and there's a lot of collab with academia. Yeah, 100%. You could work for AMD or NVIDIA doing a lot of the GPU stuff. There's so much good industry research going on in computer science. It just makes sense to go down that route if that is what you want to do. I think we get burned out keeping up with 2 chats at once, let alone doing a PhD. Yeah, luckily I'm done with the PhD. I'm just keeping up with the 2 chats. I work on applied AI space. It scratched some of that itch, but I'm no researcher, more like software engineer and with tiny bits of research elements. Yeah, so currently what I'm doing is research software engineering, and I'm feeling the same feeling. I feel like I want to get back into doing academic research. That feels like something I want to do, but I haven't been able to, you know? Find a way to switch to research position in industry, maybe get a PhD. Even I'm not sure I even need extra stress. Software engineering is cozy. I suppose if I get to a position, I'm financially independent, I can do something like that. All right. Let's see. Okay, we've got a lot more chat to catch up on, and I will get there. I consider analysis part of pure math. I'm gonna skip this because there's so much chat. I need to make sure. I didn't find a word to separate the two. I got burnt out from an undergrad, and I'm still down years later. That's fair. Look, I got burnt out, and I'm still down years later, you know? Continuous for discrete math. It's cool, man. Take your time and just breathe. It's really never too late to get into research. Yeah, I agree with this statement. If that's the case, do you think I should hire a lawyer? you might want to ask a lawyer for advice, but it could be that if the university is trying to take your IP, they might have every legal right to do so, depending on the documents that you signed at the start of your PhD. That might just be what it is, Okay. So let's keep going. So we talked a little bit about making more money after the PhD, and the answer was, yep, you probably don't make more money after the PhD, but you get different positions, and those different positions can be good. So number 2, how do you pay for a PhD? This is a good question that I get a lot. So number 1, usually PhDs come with a stipend. This is for STEM PhDs. For non-STEM fields, this is different. But the stipend is contingent on a bunch of different factors. On the one hand, it could be based on whether you're teaching classes for the university. On the other hand, it could be based on whether you're doing research. And still, yet another way to do this is just to apply for grants. There are like some grants out there, like there's one from NVIDIA and stuff like this for computational science. There's just a bunch of grants out there that allow you to fully pay for your PhD program, and these exist as well. Personally, I would not have done the PhD program if it was not paid. I would not have. But I also would not have gone to undergraduate if I didn't have a full ride. I'm very stingy when it comes to money. And so I would be a completely different person. And I'm very glad I went through the PhD. And I know that, funding is a very important factor when it comes to doing a PhD as well. And so, long story short, basically find people who have funding, who have, or find someone to apply for grants with, like find a professor who's willing to work with you to get money to do your PhD. You know what I mean? It's just how it is. Essentially, if your PhD is not funded, funding it is going to be tough, and you have to find a way to do that. How is a PhD from IIT Bombay valued in computational method? Again, focus on who you're researching with, not that specific institution. I think PhD in that field is good, regardless of which institutes you're from. The values of work. Okay. I find it funny when informatics professors reply to your ideas with, yeah, that's cool, but it was invented 60 years ago. Yeah, this is true too. The thing is though, when it comes to these type of like heavy math theories and stuff, like AI was done 50 years ago, you know what I mean? But it had a new renaissance recently because hardware came online that allows for you to do more than you could do before, right? Okay, we're going to skip number 3 and we're going to talk about it later because this is actually a big point of discussion. Let's talk about the cost-benefit analysis of doing a PhD. Now, this is what I mean. Okay, when you do a PhD, right, you're giving up 5 years of your life to do research, right? Five years of your life where you're being underpaid, right? It is what it is. You are underpaid during the PhD. You would be making more if you were to go to industry, right? So let's go ahead and plot your career trajectory really quick in terms of money that you're going to make if you did the PhD versus if you did not. So I'm going to start by drawing a line graph here. We're going to change it to blue, and we're going to say money, and then time, and then we're going to say with a PhD. So you started making very little money, and it consistently grows to maybe around this part before it tapers off, okay? So this would be basically professorship, and here's the PhD. And you get steady increases during the postdoc era, right? And then assistant and associate professor, right? That's how it is. Now, if you go to industry, this is quite different. In fact, basically the entire scale is increased significantly, right? So you're basically making postdoc funding at the start, and then it increases to basically not too much higher than a full professor, but something like this, okay? So what we're talking about when we start talking about the cost-benefit analysis of doing a PhD is the fact that at the end of the day, if you were a high-end software engineer, this is for software engineering, if you're like, a veteran software engineer, you're going to probably be making more than a full professor at some university, right? Not all the time. Some full professors are making a lot of money, and like we discussed before, some computer science professors are also doing side gigs to make it so that they top up their salary and make a lot more. But for the most part, we're talking about $100,000 for a full professorship at a university. And we're talking about the same amount for mid-level software engineer. Like this is the average software engineer makes that salary or something like this. Again, I'm not being exactly rigorous with the numbers here, but there's certainly a gap with the amount of money that you're making during the PhD, postdoc, and professorship, you're making less money, right? Is tenure at the professorship level worth it? I don't know. You can make the argument, but you're probably not going to be a professor anyway because it's so unlikely. So this gap here, if you integrate over this amount of money, ends up being essentially the cost of one child, right? That's what it ends up being. So the joke is you do a PhD. If you do a PhD, it's not even really a joke, but what people say is if you do a PhD, you're essentially giving up your firstborn child, right? Because the amount of money that you could be making would be enough to support another child through their entire life, essentially. Is that worth it to you? I don't know. That's up to you, but it's something to keep in mind. You are genuinely losing money, not just in the 5 years that you're there, but also in the career growth that you're missing out on, right? So yeah, that's something to keep in mind when we're talking about money. I don't actually look for work because that's burning me out even harder. I'm planning on being childless anyway. More money for me. Hey, also more time to do more work, which is great. Okay, so now let's talk about the independent lab bit. This is the most interesting point of discussion that was brought up by chat. Independent labs. Bell Labs was brought up in chat. The truth is, it is very difficult to run an independent lab. Why is it that the majority of fundamental research is done in academia? Why is very little research done outside of academia, outside of like industry, right? And the fact is, it's because of money. How do you fund an independent lab? What can you do to make money, right? That's the question. In general, if you're going to do an independent lab, you have to sell a product or apply for grants in such a way that you're able to get the grants and fund the lab that way. So you could do the grant thing, which is what all professors do. But the problem is, if you do grants, not all grants are available to companies, right? So there are more grants that are available for academic positions, like for universities than there are for independent companies. That's just how it is, right? So grants probably are not a sustainable way to keep your lab going. So 2, let's talk about products, all right? So if you want to sell products, that's great. But the fact is now the majority of your time is spent marketing, not doing research, right? That's what it is. Let's go here. And let me move this. Oh, sorry. This guy down here. Okay. So how else can you fund this lab? What else can you do? I don't know. Question mark, because I really don't know. There's like Bell Labs and there's some successful independent companies out there, but a lot of these companies existed for a long time in order to like they've existed for such a long time that their name is like ubiquitous with like good research, right? And so they get funding because they are at the same level as like DOE labs or something like that. You know, it's like Bell Labs is more of an anomaly than it is the rule. You know what I mean? It is very, very difficult to think of ways in which you can independently fund research outside of the academic system. That's how it is. The analogy is horrible. Yeah, I mean, it is a little horrible. I mean, the joke is that like you're giving away your firstborn son in the same way that you would like, I don't know, talk to a fairy or something and like sign away your firstborn for like a deal with the devil type of thing. Venture capital fails under grants. Good point. Venture capital. Let's talk about that. The problem with venture capital is that you're now beholden to your funders, and you gotta lie a bit. I'm sorry, like you've got to. It's not sustainable, right? The venture capitalists are there for a product, right? So it's a mix between the grants and the products, right? And so you, as an individual, I know people who are getting venture capital funding, right? And so these people are funding them for the eventual creation of a product or for something at the end, right? That they are heavily interested in, right? And so you have to, you're still marketing. You're still like trying to get some sort of money off of that product. It's just kind of like, you gotta be, you're still marketing, like you're not doing research anymore, right? And actually I know a lot of people who are getting venture capital funding, and that's exactly their problem. They hate the fact that they're doing more marketing than they are research, and they don't like that. It depends on who you are. Now, what I will say is that I personally have some belief that there is a way to use social media to fund a lab. Like, this is kind of the hope I would have with Leos Labs, that like somehow we could build this group to be large enough that like, and we can get enough revenue sources that it can become like, I don't know, like imagine Linus Tech Tips or something like this. Like they have like 100 people working for them. But imagine something like that, but it's a research lab at the end of the day, and we're doing like interesting stuff that pushes the boundary of human knowledge in ways that people might not already think. Like there's probably a way to do this. I just don't know how it's done. And so this is kind of like, I feel like there's some theory here, but like the fact that we're going off the walls and thinking about this as an option shows that there really is not a way to fund an independent lab in 2024. There are ways, but they're very, very hard, and it's easier to just, it's easier to do almost anything else, right? So let's see. How to find the right balance between focusing on a specific research topic and exploring adjacent interesting areas and subjects. You'll kind of figure it out. I always just go to papers, and when I find a topic that I find interesting, I just read that topic. I don't worry about the amount of time, or at least when I was doing the PhD, I didn't worry about the fact that I'm wasting 30 minutes or an hour reading this paper, because I knew every single time you learn something new, eventually that will come back to help you in the end, right? And so, it's never a bad idea to explore different areas. Even if you're like, man, even if you have no idea what this area is, just reading a paper, it takes 30 minutes of your time. You're going to learn something. And then at the end of the day, you might be able to use that in the future. Maybe not, but the process of exercising your brain in that way is always useful, Am I the only one that doubts whether I like the topic that I'm interested in? What if there's something that I am more interested in? I'm just an undergrad in biotech. That's a fair question, right? So let's talk about where I went from. So I did psych research first. Psych, that's where I started during my undergraduate. Then I did plasma. Then I did astro. Then I did some computational work. Then I did neuroscience. Then I did experimental work. Then I did computational physics. Point is, don't worry. You're going to bounce around a bunch. And that's kind of the point, right? Like, I don't feel any worse that I started out in psychology as an undergraduate researcher. I was interested in that topic, and I did it because I thought I was interested in it. Then I did plasma because I was interested in it. Then I did astro because I'm interested in it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Just do research. You'll find something interesting, right? And do the interesting thing, right? That's it. Whatever you find interesting, that's interesting for you at the time. You spend a year on it, do the research, duck out, do something else, you should never be scared to bounce. You should, in fact, bouncing is an advantage, right? We live in a world where interdisciplinary research is the most important research you can do, right? And it is the most important thing for you as a researcher to know how to do, how to talk to different fields, right? Being able to talk to a biologist about your plasma physics research is essential, because what if you're talking to your grandmother? You're talking to an investment funder, whoever you're talking to, being able to talk to them at a level where you respect their knowledge in a particular field, but also are able to bring to the table new knowledge in such a way that you're not demeaning what they already know. This is incredibly important. You know what I mean? And so being able to bounce simply means that you're able to, you know your worth, you're able to extend your skill set beyond what you're able to do currently, and that you're able to communicate your research in a way that other people can't. Like, this is what you're talking about. These skills are very essential, right? And doing this interdisciplinary research is doubly essential, right? I mean, the fact that I bounced so much, I've hit every area, is really helping me at MIT right now. Because essentially, whenever my boss is like, I don't understand this algorithm, I'm like, here's how it works. And I explain it. Because I've done it before. I've done MD, I've done astrophysics work, I've done finite element method, I've done everything, And so when people ask questions, it's like, yeah, I know. I genuinely know. Like, it's not that I know everything, but if you throw a topic at me, I can probably talk about it to some extent, right? Maybe not much, but enough that I'd be able to carry a conversation on with an expert in that area. And I think that's incredibly essential to being a researcher in today's world. You have to. You have to be able to talk to other researchers. And not every researcher is going to be a physicist, right? Or a biologist or a chemist or whatever. You have to be able to have these. This is one thing that OIST is really good at. As much as I know that OIST is not great for computer science, it does a really good job of having these cross-disciplinary talks. Winding path, it's comforting, it's a cool path, admiring the attitude, but how do you go from psychology to plasma physics to astrophysics? Aren't those quite different topics? Oh, 100%, right? So I can talk about what I actually did. So for psychology, for the psychology research I did as an undergraduate, again, we're still in an undergraduate, I did a study where we were checking pain tolerance for, suicidal patients. That's what we were doing. We were trying to find people who had suicidal ideation, and we were seeing if their pain tolerance was increased or decreased in order to validate a particular psychological theory that my advisor had at the time. That study didn't really go anywhere, but in the process, I was reading a whole bunch of stuff, and I learned a whole bunch about fMRIs and stuff like this, because we had to use that for the study. And in doing that, I realized, actually, I'm kind of more interested in the physics stuff than I am the psychology stuff. The process of talking to people, going through, collecting them for the survey, that's all still useful. It's stuff that's in the back of my head that I now know that I didn't know before, right? It was very hard to make the study ethical. That was why we didn't actually end up continuing with the study, because you have to be very, very careful and sensitive with the user data. It was very difficult to do correctly. Anyway, so then after that, I started doing physics, and I realized, there are people in my university who are doing plasma. I like plasma. That's pretty cool. And so I started doing some plasma research. In particular, I did molecular dynamic simulations. The same people who were doing plasma needed someone who could do computation. They knew I knew C. They knew I knew Fortran. They were like, hey, we also have a project that you can work with. And I was like, great. And so I went from doing molecular dynamics simulations in plasma to doing supernova remnant plasma simulations in space, right? And so we were trying to determine what the temperature was like immediately after a supernova, because we had reason to believe that the distribution of electrons was different than what we thought, and this could cause time scaling issues when we're talking about how long ago a supernova was, based on current images that we have from the telescopes that we have out and stuff like that. I then did computational physics at Los Alamos, and while at OIST, I did neuroscience because I was very interested in computational neuroscience. At the time, I was creating an analog electronic chip. It was called the True North chip at the time by IBM. It was it was a machine learning model in an analog electronic form, and we were really excited to find some way to turn this into an actual product and do research on it. But I then also found this other group that was doing GPU computing, and I ended up choosing that one for the PhD. To this day, I still want to go back and do the neuroscience project. I want to create this analog electronic brain. I've always wanted to do that. But somehow the GPU computing won out just because, I don't know, I vibed better with that community. You know what I mean? Point is, I did everything. And not everything, but a lot of things, neural network-based CPUs. It wasn't actually CPUs, it was a neural network-based analog computational framework was what it was. Quite different in a sense. We were modeling someone off of the True North chip, which was a neural network-based CPU, but it was largely its own product, right? It was completely different in how it worked. You could something more similar to an FPGA, you could say. Let's see. But I feel the need to balance at times too. I want to build robotics and create video games for people as well. Yeah, man. Do it. Just do it. The main thing is don't stop. Don't stop. That's it. Don't stop. Just keep making things. And as long as you keep making things, it's going to be great. And that's what you got to do. Just keep making new things, Don't as long as you continue to build things, whatever that happens to be, whether that be a video game, robots, I don't know, write a book, whatever it is, just do the thing that you find interesting at the time and find a way to fund that interesting thing. That's my philosophy, right? As long as you can fund interesting things and you keep doing what you love, things will work out, right? Yeah, good luck. I feel like now I maybe inspired someone too much, and now tomorrow they're gonna come back and they're gonna be like, I tried your thing. I sold my house, and I now realize that was actually a bad idea. It's like, wait. There's limits here. Make sure you're financially stable. That's number one. But number two is life's short. Do what you want to do. Why shouldn't sell my house? No, please don't. Oh my goodness. There's gonna be someone who comes into chat tomorrow and they're like, hey, you told me to do whatever I wanted to do and I robbed a bank and now I'm blaming you. Here's a lawsuit. It's like, no, you know what I mean. Okay. So let's keep going down the list of topics. Transitioning from being a consumer, especially in this age of social media dopamine, to a creator just feels like I had a reawakening. I mean, look, that's what it is. I always have this argument that there's this pendulum, right, of creation and consummation. I feel like that's a different word. I don't want to say consummation. I feel like that is not the word I'm looking for here. Yeah, good night. See you around. There is a pendulum of creativity and just consuming media is what I mean, right? Sometimes the pendulum swings so that you have to, like, you just can't do anything. You have to watch TV. You have to just chill, right? But it's nice if for you as an individual, your pendulum swings slightly towards creativity, right? You're more likely to create than it is to consume. That I always strive to be there, right? Sometimes I do more like consuming things. Like earlier today, I was watching Ludwig. I'm not gonna lie, I watched Ludwig play League of Legends. Part of that was because I don't know. I somehow my brain is fascinated by someone playing a video game that I don't care about at all, and this other person being so invested into it. There's some weird joy I find in that. But another thing was I had 4 hours of sleep last night. 4 hours of sleep. I could not do anything this morning. I was out, you know. And so, sometimes you need that moment just to chill. But I feel like in general it's better to make things than not. I mean, that was a long ramble, but I think you guys know what I mean. Producer over consumer. Yeah, a lot of people are stuck in this trap, and I was too. I was the darkest period of my life. I think that's just going to happen. Sia, start your live streams with a disclaimer. Yeah, look, honestly, all my live streams start with a disclaimer. That's just how they go. BSc, Computational Physics, MSc, dropped out because I hated it and tried because it seemed like it would lead to good salaries and jobs. Physics MC, pure math MC, PhD mathematical physics. Hey, math physics is great. Right, yeah, exactly. This happens. Like, it is what happens, you know? Consumption, consumerism. I think consumerism maybe was what I was talking about, but consummation was not the word. That is a completely different word. All right, let's talk about other topics. So what have we talked about so far? We talked about how to tell whether you actually like research. We don't have to talk about this one. We talked about whether PhD opens more doors than it closes. We talked about that one. Just briefly, number one, how to tell if you like research. Just do research. That's it. That's how you tell. Read papers. Talk to professors. Try to get your foot in the lab. Try to do things that you would not ordinarily have done. Whether the PhD opens more doors than it closes, it's kind of a mixed bag here. Yeah, it does close more doors than it opens, definitely. But the doors that it does open are probably more enjoyable for you if you like research, right? We talked about some ways to do research without a PhD. Again, the two ways were independent labs and maybe like Department of Energy labs or national labs or something like that. Like NASA, you can work there without a PhD and work your way up the ladder even without a PhD. So you can do research without a PhD. It's just much easier if you do have one. We talked about money. We talked about independent labs. We talked about, are you good enough? We talked about whether you can become a professor. So the two things we have left outstanding are academic biases towards academia and then some stories about Japan. So which one do you guys want to talk about, Japan or academia? I guess no one cares. So we'll talk about both. Journal, new page before. So, time for anime girls, I guess. I can pull up, if you want, I can pull up Leia. Undergrad versus tiny grad. What's a tiny grad? I haven't heard of tiny grad before. Okay. So, in Japan, there is this thing called, oh gosh, there's JSPS, all right, the Japanese Society for the Promotion of Science. And I think it's called MEX, the Ministry of Education, Exercise. I don't remember. I don't remember all the details. But the fact is, most universities, there are two different funding methods. Funding 1 and funding 2. Okay. Well, generally, we're talking about PhD in anything. But for me, I'm specifically talking about PhD in STEM fields, right? That's what we're talking about here. There's a 20-second delay in YouTube chat for answers. That's totally fair. To be honest, I asked the question and I realized I'm going to talk about both at the same time. Leia is an anime YouTube character or a VTube character that I brought up a couple times on stream, and I had a secret stream where I was specifically this VTuber because I actually enjoy VTubing. It's really fun. But I have not pulled her up in a long time just because, I don't know, I've been busy with life, you know? Okay. So, in Japan, there are basically two funding sources. The majority of, one second. The majority of universities are funded by funding source number 1, right? So let's go down here, and this is the majority of the university, right? Funding 2 is basically directly from the office of the prime minister. So I think it's or maybe it's it might not be. Maybe it's the emperor. I don't remember. It's either emperor, or prime minister. Okay, I don't remember all the details, but funding 2 is essentially just for OIST, right? So essentially, all the universities are funded by one source in Japan, and OIST is funded by a different source, and there's a reason for this, right? I don't care about buying viewers, man, but I will delete you. All right, so let's talk about exactly what OIST is. So OIST is an interdisciplinary institution in Okinawa, Japan. It's got a couple weird things for it. So one, 50% of its employees must be foreigners. Right, that's one thing. 2, it strongly encourages, we'll say like, not leftist, I won't say leftist, but we're just going to say LGBT, women, minorities, etc. Okay. So for those who know the Japanese system, you probably know that it's very strongly in favor of Japanese researchers, right? That's what it is. It is exactly that way. If you go to the University of Tokyo, pretty much everybody at the University of Tokyo has always been at the University of Tokyo. So the way this works is you do your let's say you go to Todai, which is the University of Tokyo, right? You do your undergrad. Why am I writing out like this? This is the typical lifestyle of a Tokyo professor, or like where they came from. So if you're a Tokyo professor, you probably did your undergraduate. Come on, at Tokyo. You then probably did your postdoc at Tokyo. You then probably did your assistant professorship at Tokyo. You see what I'm getting at? Like, essentially, people who were professors at Tokyo were consistently in Tokyo the entire process. They were undergraduate, postdoc, assistant professorship, full professorship, all in Tokyo, right? So essentially what we were seeing was a situation where basically there was no fluidity in the Japanese education system, right? This is quite different than how it is in the U.S. In the U.S., typically your undergraduate is at one institution. Your PhD is at another institution. I forgot PhD in here. 2 is PhD, is going to be Tokyo. And then let's just move these down the list. So 3, 4, 5, ... Okay. So in the US, typically your undergraduate is at one place, your PhD is at another place, your postdocs are at other places, and your assistant professorship is still at another place. But that's not the case in Japan. It's all kind of in the same system, right? And so you'll always be down this one line, right? And this is true for pretty much every university in Kyoto and Osaka. You're basically only working at this one university for the entire time, right? And so OIST was created. And the reason OIST was created is because they recognized this is a fundamental flaw with the Japanese, education system, and they wanted to fix that. How are they going to fix it? They just basically pay for the best and brightest people to all go to this island in Okinawa from around the world, get an interdisciplinary collaboration going on, and that was their idea. Just get as many people from outside to basically create as many ideas as possible and just to try new things, right? And so everything about OIST is in English. It's like intentionally meant to have like a huge diversity in as many ways as it can. It's just a different vibe entirely, you know? And the reason I bring this up is because it is a good, I guess, reminder that academic systems are inherently biased in the way in which they approach certain situations, right? And different cultures have different ways in which these biases appear, right? And so when we start talking about like the Japanese system, it had this problem where like a single researcher could do all of their research in one university and never leave. In the US, you also see some issues as well. You see the fact that like, academic professors tend to be quite biased towards particular like institutions and others. Like you see a selectivity bias. This is where like it matters if you go to MIT or you don't. You know what I mean? Like essentially, academics are people, right? And as much as I appreciate the research that they're doing, and I think this is very valuable and something that people should be continuing to do, I also recognize that, people are people and they're going to do stuff like what's happening in Japan, where like people just tend to all stay at the same institution forever, right? I'm going to catch up in chat here because like I didn't exactly express my point here as well as I could. And I think down here, we've got Sorov down here at University of Tokyo, and I want to hear their opinion. Did you meet the Tenno and ask for research funding? Wait, what are we talking about? Let's see. So what I'm hearing is Japanese universities come with job stability. Yeah, I guess maybe that's what you could hear. I want to go to OIST. Look, OIST is great, but I'm not going to say it's not without its downsides. I can talk about OIST if you want and what the downsides are, because there are quite a few. Let's see. There's a 22nd LA Ministry of Education, Culture, Science, and Technology. I'm a MEC scholar now at the University of Tokyo. I mean, first of all, really cool that you're there. My pathetic attempt at a joke. TinyGrad is George Holt's ML compiler. Oh, that's actually pretty good. Japanese Ministry. The problem is what you do after a PhD in a theoretical STEM. If you don't want to move very far away for postdocs, it's impossible to find your job. Oh yeah, no, that's actually true. Just for the record, I said this at the start, I'm going to say it again. Academic lifestyles are nomadic. You are going to have to move. Like, this is an anomaly, what's happening here in Japan. You will move. And you'll move internationally. I went from Japan. I'm now in Barcelona. I've lived in the US. I go everywhere. Wherever the research funding is, you go. That's just what life is for researchers. I know people who have been researchers their entire life, and that's what they do. They go and anywhere they can find funding, and they live there. Right? It's impossible to raise a family in a way that the children will be happy. But that's what you do. You need money, you know? So, yeah. Did you ever get to meet Shinichi Mochizuki in the Inter-Universal? I did not. It's definitely funded by the Emperor. That's interesting. I didn't see this person. Earlier you mentioned... The problem is, earlier you mentioned the value of breadth of your experience, but PhD is thesis all about depth. How are you able to strike a good balance? It's called work ethic. No, it's called I didn't sleep. That's what it's called. So my schedule was insane. Every morning I'd get up at 4:30 in the morning to prepare for a live stream from 5 to 7. So during that time, we would explore key ideas that I was not really able to explore otherwise, right? So I was doing simulations, like we did invisible lens simulations. In fact, I can just show you right now. Here, let me go to... github.com, and let's go to Simuleos. So this is just a short list of the things that I did during the PhD, from 5 to 7 in the morning. It's just, we did a whole bunch of different things. We did Barnes Hut simulations for galaxy simulations. We did DMRD, dense matrix renormalization group. We did finite difference time domain, genetic algorithms, a bunch of GPU stuff, optimal control, quantum Monte Carlo. We did quantum Monte Carlo. I remember that now. Affine transformations. All this stuff was stuff that I did during the PhD, with live on stream, because they were things that I thought people could understand and learn together with me on, right? It's all stuff that I did. You see some of this like 8 years ago, you know? So the reason I bring this up is that I kind of have a bunch of philosophies that are contradictory, right? On the one hand, I firmly 100% believe that you as an individual, your research is only as good as your ability to communicate that research, right? And so I actively was working on soft skills by doing this type of live stream. I was trying my best to make sure that the people who, like, not only was I learning skills, but I was able to communicate those skills, right? And you could argue that this stream was one reason why I have such breadth in terms of knowledge. But the other thing is, very specifically, I did push the boundary of human knowledge in ways that people had not done before. Now, did I do it in a great way? Maybe not. Like, you could argue that my specific research will never be experimentally validated because I literally just put a nanofiber in the middle of a BEC and simulated it. Okay, fine. But I learned a lot of things that I now use every day, and this breadth is incredibly important, right? Because we're living in such an interdisciplinary world, breadth becomes depth, right? Because there are very few people who are able to jump from computational biology to computational physics and have a conversation with both of them about the algorithms that work for both cases. You know what I mean? That just doesn't happen. There are very few people who can do that, but I can, And this is something where, like, I understand that doing a PhD is about, like, drilling down in one particular topic and learning as much as you can about that topic, and that is true. But in doing so, you run into a situation where you are ignoring very clear benefits of other areas around you that will become useful down the line, right? And so, like, the algorithms I learned, like edit distance algorithms I learned to do computational biology work, became very useful down the line when I was thinking about different algorithms that we could implement on the GPU with some discussions we had with people at MIT. Like, this stuff ends up becoming useful, right? And so basically, yeah, you should hyper focus on something, but don't feel afraid to look into the adjacent areas is what I should be saying. Like, I know I'm a fringe case. Like, I'm a weird case because again, every morning I was up streaming. I worked from 9 to 5. And then when I got home, all I did was read papers until 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night when I went back to sleep. And then I woke up in the morning to do more research. Like, everything from basically 5 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night was research focused, except for like 1 hour I did to work out in the middle there, right? I skipped lunch. So I could do more research, you know. Sometimes I would have conversations with friends around tea or something like that, but like those were really the only breaks I had. Like I was really working up until 2019, which is when I was writing the thesis, and I took a little bit of downtime because I think writing a thesis is a bit of a mental strain, you know. So I played Ring Fit a bit. I played Ring Fit, a little bit of Super Smash Brothers, you know, Ultimate when it came out, you know. But every other moment of my time was spent, you know, doing research or finding ways to do research more efficiently or talking to people about research. That's what I did, you know, which is why I usually say the PhD is what you make of it. And specifically OIST is what you make of it. It gives you the framework to do whatever you want to do, but you have to make sure that you really stick to it and you do that thing, because at the end of the day, it's up to you what you learn, right? And it's your job to learn as much as you can during this time. Anyway, I didn't do a very good job explaining that, but I'm hoping the gist came across, right? Breadth is important. I feel like it gives you tools that you wouldn't otherwise use. But obviously to finish the thesis, you need that depth as well. So you just need to strike a balance. And the way you strike a balance is through just working your butt off, usually. On YouTube, IAS is a great place to be. Probably a dream of many researchers, especially for the CS and math. Wait, IAS is a great place to be on YouTube. Wait, what? Tell me more. I want to learn about this guy. I'm at University of Tokyo, and yep, my professor has done everything for University of Tokyo as well. Yeah, that's just what it is in Japan. Japan's promotion culture is horrible. You basically wait in line for one above you to quit and die and promoted. Yeah, look, I'm not going to argue that the Japanese work culture is great. I liked my time at OIST, but OIST is not Japan. There's a reason why we're in Barcelona and we're not in Japan. The work culture in Japan is just radically different than anywhere else in the world, and you could argue that it's similar to the U.S. in certain places, but even the U.S. has more work-life balance, I would argue, than Japan in certain areas. Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton. Great. I see. Oh, you were replying to Jinin on YouTube. I gotcha. I misunderstood. Tokyo ranks the 3rd most expensive city in the world, according to Wiki. Yeah, and you probably are not paid appropriately to live there either. I mean, I assume that's just how it is if you're a researcher. They seem similar to OIST. I really love the setup. It's purely postdoc professor-led research. Would love to hear about OIST cons. Okay, yeah, okay, fine. Let's talk about OIST. OIST. Okay, everybody knows, or anybody that watched my stream back when I was at OIST knows. I was, oh my goodness, I'm very sniffy right now, but I was, and in some sense still am, what some would consider to be an OIST shill. All right? I like OIST. I had a great time at OIST. You are in a subtropical island off the coast of Japan. It's beautiful. You look out the window, there's the ocean. It's just a beautiful place to be, a beautiful place to do research. But it doesn't come without its downsides. So, let's talk. Admissions.oist.jp. I misspelled it. Admissions.oist.jp. There we go. Also, let me go on Twitch really quick. I got a couple followers over the past couple hours, and I just hadn't said anything. So Petas Z and also XO Ahmed XOX, thanks for following, guys. Okay. So admissions. Where do I start? Let's go to research. Okay. Overview. All right. OIST is special in that there are no departments. So there is no physics department. There is no chemistry department. There is no computational department. Rather, each individual researcher has their own unit that they're running. And the unit is funded largely by someone in the Japanese government, right? You can get funding elsewhere. But because you're in Japan, the funding sources are kind of few and far between. It's harder to find the funding sources. So, especially because you're a foreign researcher in Japan, like you're ultimately reliant on Japanese funding, right? Which is why if I were to open a research lab in OIST, my stipulation would be that I somehow find funding outside before going there. Because it's just, if you're reliant on government funding, in a very similar way to grants, you pigeonhole yourself into I don't know, it's, getting funding at OIST is hard, but you are guaranteed to have that funding from a different source. So for a particular, for like the next 10 years or something like that. But eventually you have to find your own funding. So you have to find a way to strike that balance between just taking money from the government and getting grants from the government or otherwise finding funding. It's difficult for professors to exist there for over 10 years. But OIST is brand new. It's only been there for a couple of years. I was part of the third graduating class from OIST. You know what I mean? And so they're basically trying to figure out how to run a university on the fly. And because of this, there are some core issues that have kind of cropped up, right? Like some people don't like the president, or some people don't like this, like a lot of social issues, right? These social issues, I would argue, are present anywhere. Like I find them at MIT as well. But it's especially prevalent in OIST when it's so open and everyone can have a say. And so basically it's, on the one hand, is trying to be this interdisciplinary university, and it does a very good job at allowing people to have cross-disciplinary talk. On the other hand, because it is so open and there's so much discussion, a lot of the dark underbelly issues that appear in academia in general are very present at OIST. It's stuff that, because I don't know, you just start to see like these people who they're at OIST, they like doing physics, but they think that computational science is dumb or something like that. Like in particular, we were looking for, I think this is the best story I can tell about the negative sides of OIST. Now, let it be known, I still am very positive about OIST. Before I tell the story, before I go any further, I honestly think that OIST is a wonderful place. It is by far the best university I've been to. I really appreciate it. I like the culture. I like so much about OIST. However, it has been changing in the past years when I haven't been there. And then also, it wasn't the best for everybody. Like my roommate left OIST and then went to MIT afterwards, right? And enjoyed MIT, but did not like OIST. And the reason was because he had a different professor at OIST than I did. And the professor at OIST who was there just worked him really hard and kind of forced him to do stuff he didn't want to do, and did research in kind of, not necessarily a shady way, but in a very academic way that didn't vibe very well with him, right? And so it really, even here, is about finding the professor that works best for you, right? You can find those professors, or you can not find those professors. You have to basically go there and find the right people to work with, right? They give you every opportunity to find the right people to work with, but it's still not easy. And especially with, the Japanese yen dropping by 50% in value over the past few years, according to the, with respect to the US dollar, funding is not as good as it used to be, I think I can say that. But my biggest problem with OIST was the following. So there was one time there was a discussion that was led by someone in CSAIL. So basically, someone from the MIT CSAIL group, where I'm currently a part of, came to OIST and gave a talk, okay? The talk was on computer graphics, okay? Now, for those of you guys who don't know about computer graphics, I am incredibly, a huge fan of computer graphics, right? In my opinion, there are two people in the world who have dealt with massive parallelism at scale, right? And that's computer graphics people and computational scientists. The same algorithms that work in computer graphics have been basically workshopped and are now used every day in computational science, right? So if you're a scientist, you should just meaningfully care about computer graphics research, because everything that they're showing off, sure, they're cool visual demos, but you can see the algorithms behind it and why it's interesting and the state of the art immediately because they're cool visual demos. And then you can think about how you can apply those algorithms in your actual research because they're interesting. They're stuff that you haven't seen before, right? And so this person came up, and this person gave a talk on computer graphics, right? And he talked about all this kind of stuff, and so many cool things. He did some, solar system visualizations to make it photorealistic. He did actual simulations of cheese coming off of a pizza, which was kind of interesting at the time. He did a whole bunch of different stuff. I'm like, this is a really cool guy. I'm a big fan of this research. And then there were questions, right? And there was kind of an awkward cough in the room, and you could tell that nobody in the room fully understood what was going on, because no one in the room had the same, appreciation for computer graphics research as I did. And so the first question he was asked was from someone who basically does string theory. And the question was, if you were to use the simulation methods that you used for this project to simulate the universe, how far off would you be, right? That was the question. On the one hand, I think it was meant as a joke, but it kind of came off really as if this person was trying to show off how much better he is for doing a pure science instead of computer graphics. And there's this feeling at OIST that I constantly felt. One of my advisors, the people on my committee, had openly told me that computer science rather, is all junk. It's not worth looking at, right? There's just this weird bias towards very specific research groups at OIST. And it's something that came out a lot that I don't feel, it is present everywhere else, but it's something that you just didn't expect. It's like if you walk into somewhere and they say, yeah, we're open for everybody except you. And that person that they're pointing to is basically you. You know, it's like, well, but why not? Like I'm doing research just like you guys. I'm interested in pushing the boundary of human knowledge in the same way. The stuff I'm doing is fundamentally useful to you. Why is this not an interesting area of research? But that's just what it is. And they couldn't find, basically the push for OIST in the areas that I'm interested in computer science has not happened. And it's, I don't know, it's quite, it's one of those things where like, I mean, there's a reason I was live streaming from 5 to 7 in the morning doing computational science. The reason was because there was not a community of people doing that at OIST, right? And there was a weird bias against computational science at OIST, even though fundamentally it's what they were using to do their work. And that, to me, was my biggest problem with the university. Now, has that changed? A little bit. There's still a lot more work that needs to be done here. And I've constantly wondered if maybe I should just like, publish a bunch of results in computer graphics. I've got a lot of papers I want to publish, and then just like apply to OIST, because I know they're in need of computational groups who can actually teach computer science, specifically GPU engineering, which is like what I'm really good at. And I've wondered if maybe that's what I should do. I should just like publish papers, write this book that I've been trying to write, get the papers out, and then go back and be like, yo, I'm here. I'm the computational graphics unit. What do you need? I'm here to help you guys. And then, I don't know, I've thought like I could live stream it. I don't know. I've been thinking about this a lot. I don't know, there's a lot of things that I want to do here, but I can't quite figure out how to get it all to work together. Like, because in my mind, I loved OIST so much that I want it to succeed. You know what I mean? I just, as much as I love it, I can't recommend it. It's like, it's such a pain that it's such a good place to be. And there were so many interesting people doing so much interesting work, and yet I can't recommend it because of some core limitations and stuff like this. And so if I just went back as a professor, then I could recommend it. I could say, hey, if you're interested in computer science, specifically computer graphics, come to my lab. I could say that, but I can't because I can't, And so it's a weird situation that we're in right now with OIST where I want to recommend it, but I really can't. Let me catch up on chat. Because that was a very rambly way for me to talk about it. I think it's just between like getting 4 hours of sleep and me being just a little sick still. Somehow I've been sick for weeks. It's been very rambly today, but I'm hoping most of the ideas have come across. I don't understand how a researcher of all people who supposedly should be filled with the utmost curiosity for the world will look down on some fields in academia. But it happens all the time. You see physicists looking down at biologists for not being like pure enough. And then you have like pure math being too pure. And I don't know, like pretty much everyone in academia loves the research they're doing. And when they see other people doing other research, sometimes they feel like the other people doing the other research is like encroaching on their territory. I don't know exactly how to put it, but like they are... there is a feeling that, this group is being funded, whereas I'm not, or something like this, like it's like jealousy that doesn't need to be there, that causes like communication between groups to be not as clear as it could be. I have to sneeze, guys. 1 second. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm still a little sick. How much is Clifford algebra used? I fully appreciate computer graphics, and I view it as geometry and algebra. Yeah, I mean, there are so many areas where computer graphics is great. It's so great. I mean, like, again, they deal with massive parallelism because they do GPUs. They're currently the ones who are pushing the technology that everyone is using for all their computational needs. Like, it's crazy. I mean, computer graphics is great. CS is junk. I'm the coolest. It's the coolest of them all. I do understand people who say this claim. That what they're trying to argue is that CS is not as advanced as the other fields because it competes with industry, right? And if you're trying to be a pure academic, there are a lot of CS papers out there that don't feel as substantial as other papers in other fields. You could say that CS is applied math in some sense, and you wouldn't be wrong in certain areas. I understand what they're trying to say, but the way in which it was said, like basically, I was in the middle of a like kind of. It wasn't a mock exam, but it was one of those things where you have to explain the research that you did over the past year. And so I was explaining the research I did over the past year. And I mentioned that I implemented this algorithm. I've been looking into this stuff. And like the person mentioned that, it's like, well, I mean, if you're just doing algorithm work, like what's the point? I was like, well, I mean, if you're just doing physics work, what's the point? Like it's one of those things where I didn't say that out loud, but I remember thinking, it's like, what a stupid question. Like, it's just fundamentally, you don't understand the research I'm doing. And that happened a lot at OIST, where because I was the only one doing computational work in my unit, it just ended up being that like people didn't understand the research I was doing and why it was interesting, right? If OIST is an engineering university, they're making a big mistake. It's not quite. It's a research university. That's what it is. there is a culture in pure math about hating applied math, which is kind of sad. It's that culture. That's the culture that is somehow prevalent at OIST. In certain areas, I think it is getting better because the professor that initially said that, computer science was, garbage or whatever, came up to me later when I came back to OIST for a little bit, asking if he could learn Julia. So I think he understands now, things are changing. I don't know if they're changing for the better or the worse, but things are changing. Is there a zero-sum assumption between departments? I don't think so. There shouldn't be. I would hope that all nonsense would stop after high school. Yeah, but it is how it is. There's a lot of high school drama. To be fair, there was more drama at MIT than there was at OIST. Just for the record, if I'm being totally clear, there was more drama at MIT, pound for pound, than there was at OIST, by far. At MIT, there are people who would literally cry at lab meetings. It's a completely different vibe. That would never happen at OIST, or at least not that I saw. With the groups I was working with, it would not happen. That's what I will say. But that's why it's such an exciting field. CS is young, and there's a lot of interesting problems to solve. Like you're preaching to the choir. I would have loved to look at your face when the professor approached you. Yeah, no, I was wearing a mask at the time because it was during COVID. But the YouTube channel is awesome. Why even go to the talk given they're already predisposed to be uninterested? Would have been frustrating to be the presenter. Yeah, it's one of those things where OIST encourages interdisciplinary work, and I think this one was particularly high. Like, people went to this talk because this person was being was requesting a job at OIST. That's what it was. It was a job talk, so more people were there than usual. Benefits of the interdisciplinary environment at OIST. Look, so all that stuff that I just said about OIST not being friendly to certain fields, that happened, but it is still more friendly than anywhere else I've been. Right? I was able to have talks with people about the research they were doing, and I was genuinely inspired by people who were doing research with coral reefs or mangroves or stuff like this, stuff that I would ordinarily not find interesting, but because they were there and they were doing research and there was a mutual respect between us, I was able to have conversations and genuinely become interested in the research they were doing, right? And this is something that could not happen in other places, not at the same level. So, why even go talk? Let's see. Sure. My professor once said that software is unique in that the practice is done first, and then theory and curriculum is developed around it. I kind of find that not true, but anyway, I understand what they're trying to say. The fact is that software is unique. Computer science is unique because there is a huge industry push in computer science that does not exist in other fields. And so not only are you competing with your other labs, but you're competing with NVIDIA, who is always going to be doing better at GPU research than you are because they are fundamentally GPU people. You know what I mean? So it's it's very difficult. The people leading the charge in research are not usually academics in computer science, whereas the complete opposite in other areas, right? And so there is some animosity there because of that. Yes, exactly that. Breadth and depth are both useful. There was someone who asked, someone asked about the title of the stream. Where was that? My professor... Wait, can I ask about the title? Oh, somehow I kept missing this. Yes. Yeah, ask. Somehow I missed that chat. What do you want to ask? So we've just actually been through a lot of the discussion. So we've talked about all these topics already. So we talked about how to tell whether you like research, whether the PhD opens doors. We talked a little bit about academic bias towards academia and some stories about Japan. So I think actually at this point in time, we've talked about all the topics that we wanted to talk about so far. It's been a 2 hour and 15 minute stream. And we've talked about all this kind of stuff. But if you guys have specific questions you want to talk about, now's the time. We've got a bouncing off a chat and all that kind of stuff. And we found our way around all the different topics. I was very rambly at the end there about OIST. And so I want to be very clear about one thing. And that's that, again, I loved my time at OIST. That was not true for all students, but I loved my time there. And for me, it was great. For everyone else, maybe not. And it really does depend on you. So if you do want to apply for OIST, and again, I feel like I'm an OIST shill here, like I'm recommending it, like somehow OIST is, like I'm an OIST advertiser, I'm not. But I'm saying I would recommend going to a research internship program here. So just go here, look at the faculty availability, and see if any of these projects look interesting, is what I would say. Just visit it first. They allow you to visit it. They'll fly you out there. They'll pay for your time there. It's a good program that allows you to feel the vibe of the institution first. And there's a lot of places that will do this. They allow you to do an internship with another program in order to feel like whether you actually want to do the PhD there or not. What's the summary of point two? Summary of point two, the PhD will close more doors than it opens because you will technically be considered overqualified for certain positions, but the doors it does open are usually more research-oriented jobs. So if you like doing research and you want to do research in industry, the PhD is not bad. It's not a bad thing to choose if that's what you want to do. Keep in mind, though, these new research jobs are not necessarily going to fund you more. In fact, that you might take a paid dip because of them. It depends on where you're going. But again, the doors will be more interesting in terms of research. Can we talk about what would make something desirable from a perspective of advertising in case someone was to pitch something? Could you tell me more about what you mean? So you're asking like why people would invest in a particular project? Is that what you're asking? I was sort of tempted to go study for an econ PhD, but I'll watch the VOD before I discuss further. So I didn't talk so much about economics here. I think economics is a fundamentally different game, specifically because PhDs, I don't think are paid in economics. They might be paid, but I don't know if you can get a good stipend in economics or not. So everything that we talked about here was mainly for STEM fields, right? But if you're talking about economics or any other area, I don't have expertise here, and I don't think the stuff that I'm talking about will necessarily be as valuable for that discussion. And in fact, I don't even feel comfortable having that discussion. But if you have specific questions, I'm happy to answer. But it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be a project that's finalized. Yeah, so I've got a bunch of friends who are like applying for investment funding. And basically what you do is you sell the dream of the project more than the project itself. You create like a quick demo that can kind of do the thing that you're looking for. And then you explain the ways in which this will be improved and the areas in which this will help, right? So I've got a friend who's doing this endoscope, and he goes around, he explains, hey, this is why it's useful and better than these tools. Here's how it could be used in these areas. Here's why it's better than the state of the art, all this kind of stuff, right? Keep in mind that this to me is quite different than the type of research that I typically do, right? I typically do more like fundamental research, stuff that is not really marketable, right? And funding fundamental research is quite a lot harder than funding research that could eventually create a product. It's in that like the funding here comes from like governments, and you're at the whim of whether the U.S. government decides to cut funding for your project or not. It's just a fundamentally different area. I get that. I'd like to know anyway. Yeah. Again, if you have specific questions, I'm happy to talk about it. But I don't really know what specific questions, like how different an econ PhD is from a STEM PhD. I'll consider it. When looking for collaborations, how important is chemistry? So, I mean, does it make sense to try to collaborate with someone just because you get along well, despite the research not 100% aligned? That really depends on you. So, let's talk about hiring people really quick. So let's say you're trying to hire someone into your lab, right? The person is interested in working with you, clearly, but maybe they don't have exactly all their ducks in a row. Like they're missing, like if I do GPU work, maybe they understand Python or Julia, but they've never done parallel work before, right? Well, there's a big gap. I have to teach them a lot before they're going to be able to do GPU stuff. There's a lot of stuff to do there. But hiring, more than anything else, is a vibe check. You're trying to see whether you're willing to work with this person or not, right? Obviously, if they do not pass the vibe check, you will not work with them, right? If they give you, if for some reason they say something that puts you off, you need to drill down and you need to make sure that this person that you're going to be working with is someone you actually want to be working with. That's the number one thing. Vibe check is the most important. Because if you guys both pass a vibe check and you like working on projects and you want to find a way to work together, you'll find a way to work together, because again, interdisciplinary research is big. It's always important to crosstalk. And so you'll find a way if you guys want to. Specifically if you're doing software work, which is kind of more the stuff that I'm doing, you'll always find a way. Algorithms are, you can use them anywhere, So I know I think chemistry is like the number one most important thing. But also an interesting project is important as well. Like you need that interesting project. So, chemistry is number one, but close number two is interest, right? Everything outside of that, you'll figure out, Microsoft funds pretty fundamental stuff about logic and math. That's true. And when you think about it, the reason they're doing this is there's a couple reasons. I think they get tax advantages. They can write these off if they do so. But it's because these are also of interest to products that they will eventually sell, and they need more development in it. It's like how like a lot of these big companies, when they're doing AI, are now opening up like nuclear startups essentially, so that they can fund or like charge the AI that they're powering. You know what I mean? They need more power, and so they're creating a nuclear power plant in order to get that more power, right? Well, in these, like, you do need some fundamental research to happen in order for like your eventual goals to come to fruition, right? So basically everybody knows that funding research is a net win for society, right? It's a question of whether Microsoft funding research is a net win for it as a company as well, because again, it is a company. It's trying to make as much money as possible. So it is getting something from this, this research. The question is, what is it getting? Is it just getting more advanced like algorithms? Or what was it getting? You know, it's getting something. Or it's getting the, like, maybe it's exploring like, I don't know, the foundations of an algorithm to see whether this is possible or not. Yeah, there's a lot of things it could be getting. You came to say no for the PhD. Look, honestly, if you don't like doing research, the answer is no. If you do like doing research, the answer is pretty much yes. I mean, that's what I said at the start, and I'm sticking by that. Like, fundamentally, if you like doing research, the PhD is probably not a bad option for you. But if you don't like doing research, probably not the best option for you. I found that Microsoft Research does a lot more research in theory CS, more than the research department of other companies. That's fair. To advance civilization, prestige. Yeah, a lot of people go for different things like this. When I heard that econ publishing is really bad, like if you don't publish in Big Four, nobody will look at your result. That could be true in a lot of other areas as well. Like for example, in physics, if you don't publish in PRL or something like this, you know, your paper will still get out there. But like, no, that's not true, right? PRA, you know, Quantum, New Journal of Physics. These are all journals that people read. I think maybe there's just more reading to be done from physicists than other groups. It depends. University of Tokyo, I ended up joining a lab with which works on stuff different from my focus area. My professor has no issues with that, and in fact encourages me to do work on whatever I find interesting. Everyone I've spoken to has mentioned that having a good professor is better than having a professor whose interests are aligned with yours. 100%. 100%. Because a good professor will allow you to explore areas that you're actually interested in, and even collaborate with the professor who might have more interesting research, right? That's great. But having a bad professor is just bad, right? So like the point is like you could be incredibly interested in a particular type of research, and you might really, really want to work with that person. But if you find that this person is like, I don't know how to put it, but someone who's like really overworking their employees, and you just can't, you feel suffocated in the lab, don't work with that person anymore, right? Like you just can't. Like they need to. We've for too long in academia we have kept propping up people who have very poor work-life balance habits, right? And they have tried to propagate those poor work-life balance habits onto their lab, and in that propagation, it has caused like this huge fiasco where people are just overworking for very little pay for like no reason. Like outside of academia, like there's a lot of people who tend to believe that academics are like overpaid for the work that they're doing or something like that. And it's incredible to me that like, you know, you're being paid less than minimum wage, you know, for most of these jobs, you know. It's incredible to me that people actually believe that, you know. Same as in the same vein, I have heard that young and more active professor is better than a PI with an old celebrated professor. It does depend on the professor though, because some of the younger and active professors have totally bought and sold or have totally bought into, whatever. They also are these like very heavily like overworking type of people. It does depend on the professor. Good as a nice person or well-respected? Good as in kind, humble. Yeah, that's what you want. You want a kind, humble person. What scientific computing researchers inspire you and why? I mean, that's a good question, because to me, what I find more inspiring than any individual is like, how do I put this? Like individual research papers, right? So thrusts of research, because it's hard for me to find like an individual researcher that I find inspiring, right? But I do find particular, you know, groups, like particular ideas very interesting, right? And it's one of those things where like, you know, like for example, I've gotten really into computer graphics recently. Like all this stuff with Gaussian splatting, super cool to me. If I just go to the archive right now, I can find you like 20 papers that I find super engaging and super interesting, and I'd love to read more of. Like I was really into like weird histogram methods and stuff like that. People who were writing like old GPU gem groups, like anyone who's been doing GPU computing for the past 20 years, like I find them really cool and inspiring, right? So you could just grab any of the GPU gem papers and I'd be like, yep, these guys are great. But then, also I find other areas really interesting. Like, for example, I like large molecular dynamic simulations. What can I say? They're fun. It's particularly easy. They're great to parallelize. And so some of the machine learning potential stuff that I've been doing recently got really into like neighbor list calculations for these large n-body simulations. Those are pretty cool. Like, essentially, like, the problem is I don't have like a specific researcher because I find that like every day I have some new thing that I'm interested in, and so I can't tell you exactly. But what I can tell you is that none of the researchers are popular guys. It's not like things that win the Nobel Prize. I don't find these super interesting or engaging. So usually the papers that I enjoy are the ones from like just an average professor in University of Kansas who had some interesting problem that they solved, and these are the ones that I find the most fun to read through, because it's like when you're browsing your feed, okay, like the entire conversation is on politics or AI or something like this, and everyone's talking about this, and then you see the one guy who's like, I don't know, built a mansion out of Coca-Cola cans or something, and you're like, oh, that's interesting, I didn't know you could do that, right? It's like those refreshing breaths of air, fresh air that you wouldn't ordinarily see. So basically any paper that's non-AI and computer graphics related, I'm in. I had this thought for a while, way back when. I ended up going with pharmacy school. Yeah, for the PhD or not. As a professor, you must market your research to get grants. So as you market your work for VC money, big tech researchers have to justify their work with companies' bottom line. Yeah, that's how it is. Any route that doesn't need marketing. Any route that doesn't need marketing, I don't think it's possible to do. Okay, you can work for somebody, right? And so the routes that don't need money would be, for example, the following. So one would be industry research. 2, national labs. Those are the 2 big routes that people take. There's probably another one that I'm forgetting that people take if they want to do research, but they don't necessarily want to do the marketing for the research, right? They don't want to apply for grants. They don't want to. I don't know, go for VC money, or they don't want to, put out any products or anything like that. Like, these are the big other areas, right? See, Amaris, thanks for stopping by. So industry research, like I said before, sorry, my throat's a bit scratchy. Sorry about that. Industry research, you go to Microsoft, you work in their quantum division. That's what you do, right? National labs. This is like the DOE labs, so Los Alamos, Lawrence Livermore, stuff like this. Again, you are a researcher working with them, and you don't necessarily need to apply for grants because the funding is given to you by another source. Sure, you don't get to pick and choose your research so much, but on the other hand, you get to do research for as long as you want to do research, right? And industry research, national labs, these are both, in a sense, more stable jobs than what you're going to get in academia, at least until you get to a full professorship level. So with all that said, I encourage people to look at these options, because industry research in CS is huge, I specifically avoided that comment, share more about people crying in lab meetings at MIT, because those people could be watching. Not necessarily, but also, like, if somebody I know watches this video, they would know almost certainly the person I'm talking about, and I don't want to shame that person, right? Because, like, my old roommate will sometimes watch my streams, and they would know exactly who I'm talking about, and I don't want to talk about that, I just dropped out of my PhD, and now I'll never be Dr. Helps. I mean, to be fair, your last name is so good. I mean, like, it's already good enough as is. But yeah, the PhD is... Wait, how long ago did you drop off of your PhD, by the way? Was it like well before I've met you online, Oh, maybe I shouldn't ask. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have asked. But I'm always quite curious about, like, I never know how old people are around me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've got some friends. She's like... I shouldn't say, because you'll find out who this person is. I have some friends who are in like high level areas of certain industries in Barcelona that we somehow met in daycare. And she is like 10 years older than me, but I had no idea. I thought she was our age. You know what I mean? Like, somehow, like, I'm very, very bad at judging. Like, the level that other people are at based on their educational background and stuff like this. And so I don't know, I'm just interested, 2012, maybe 13. Oh, so like a year before I started my PhD. Then I started mine in 2014. Yeah, and I know there are a whole bunch of YouTube comments that for some reason think I'm like a junior high kid or something like that, just because my voice is apparently not, like, I don't sound super, I don't know what it is, but I get jokes all the time on my 4D test direct video about how, like, this junior high kid has, like, schooled them in math or something like this. I don't know, it's crazy. I was 25 at the time I made that video, so anyway, it is what it is. At this point, though, I think we've kind of wrapped up the discussion. We talked about everything I wanted to talk about. If you guys have further questions, comments, concerns, ideas, anything like that, feel free to let me know, whether it be here on the live chat or in the YouTube comment section. I'll do what I can to answer those questions. By and large, the reason I made this video and I did this live stream was just because this is the number one question I've been asked time and time again. People come to the chat and they ask, should I do a PhD? And the answer is somehow simultaneously incredibly complicated and incredibly not complicated at all. Uncomplicated, whatever. On the one hand, if you like doing research, do the PhD. That's it. That is kind of the short end of the stick. Now, there's a whole bunch of things that entails. One is determining whether you like doing research or not. Whether, like, you want to do research jobs into the future. Whether you're willing to put up with the academic process. Like, there's so many things that you have to consider here. And I hope that throughout this conversation, we talked about those things and we explained what exactly, the positives and negatives are for doing a PhD. You know what I mean? And so I think with all that said, this is a pretty good place to go ahead and close shop, especially because it's been 2 hours and 30 minutes of me just rambling. And that is a long time to listen to basically anybody ramble for any reason whatsoever. So yeah, we'll go ahead and close off the YouTube side of things about now. But I think the viewership on YouTube and Twitch were okay today. I think it was pretty okay. If you combine the two of them, I think we're at about 50 average viewers, which is not bad. So this means that there were people who were significantly interested in this question, which is great. Now, in terms of my future streaming schedule, I actually, as much as I hate to say it, I don't think I can stream on Thursday, and I don't think I can stream on Friday this week. The main reason being that Thursday, somehow I just had a meeting that was shifted from Monday to Thursday. Even though Thursday is Thanksgiving, I don't really have a choice in the matter, so I have to go to the meeting on Thursday. That means no stream. Friday, I have another meeting. I don't know. Point is, I might not be able to stream for the rest of this week. I'm doing the best I can, but I might not be able to. So the earliest I can see you guys might not be until next, I don't know, Monday, Tuesday. I'm going to do the best I can. And that's the goal for the next stream. I'm doing the best I can to do as many streams as possible, but I can't guarantee that there will be another one this week. I don't know if this was covered, but if you can get paid and then leave with a master's, it's not bad. It's not a bad deal. I didn't mean to do that, but it worked out all right. Yeah, I know a lot of people who did that, and honestly, it's fine. You get a free not a free master's, but you get a master's. And a couple of my friends did that as well. It's a pretty good idea for a lot of people. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you guys so much for coming in. Have a wonderful day, night, afternoon, morning, evening, whatever time it happens to be your time. And I will see you guys around next time for the next episode of Leos Labs. Again, next week, maybe tomorrow. I don't know when it's going to be, but I'll put a YouTube notification up and let you guys know. And I'll also let everyone know on Discord. So until then, bye guys.